The war is over, but the world is not yet kind. The fires of Troy have faded into smoke, and across a trembling sea, one man dares to sail home through the wrath of gods and the whispers of temptation. His name is Odysseus, a warrior of wit and heart, cursed to wander through storms and illusions. Ahead of him lie islands of song and ruin, beasts that wake in hunger, and women whose love can turn a man to stone or keep him forever dreaming. This is not just a voyage of oceans. It is a voyage of the soul. Through love and loss, pride and forgiveness, the long echo of home calling through the dark. The wind shifts, the oar cuts the water once, and stillness answers. Imagine standing on a silent deck beneath a sky without stars. Would you listen for the voice of home, or the song of something else entirely? Tell me in the comments, what would call you more, peace or discovery? If you love history, gently tap like and subscribe, so more voices from the past can find their way to you. Now dim your screen, let the air grow still, and journey with me to where myth sleeps beneath the waves. The fires have dimmed to embers, yet the air still trembles with what has been. Troy lies quiet now, its proud walls broken, its streets empty save for drifting smoke and scattered sand. The dawn creeps across the ruins like a cautious hand, brushing ash from marble and bronze. Somewhere, a gull cries over the tide, a lonely sound that echoes the weariness of 10 long years. Odysseus stands at the water's edge, the hem of his cloak darkened by the surf. The war that stole his youth has finally ended, and still he cannot rest. Around him, the men of Greece move in silence, repairing sails, hauling spoils aboard, avoiding the sight of one another's faces. They are alive, but not the same. None of them are. The wind carries the smell of burnt cedar and seaweed, and it stings his eyes. He looks toward the horizon where the sea waits, wide, endless, and blue as a memory half forgotten. Home lies somewhere beyond that line, a green island shaped by cliffs and olive trees, where Penelope keeps her lamps burning through each night. He imagines her at her loom, weaving and unweaving, the faint pattern of his name caught in every thread. A voice breaks the silence behind him. "King Odysseus, the ships are ready." He turns to see Eurylochus, his cousin, face drawn and salt-streaked, yet loyal still. The man bows slightly, his gaze searching for approval, or maybe for courage. Odysseus gives a quiet nod. Then we sail at first light. The wind shifts, cool, deliberate, brushing through the camp like a whisper. The gods are watching, he can feel it. Victory at Troy has angered some, pleased others, and offended more than he will ever know. The thought presses against him like the weight of a storm not yet born. He walks among the ships, touching their hulls as though greeting old friends. Each vessel bears the scars of battle, splintered planks, patched sails, the stains of salt and smoke, yet they still float, stubborn and steadfast. The men murmur to one another in low voices, telling half jokes, small stories, anything to fill the hollow space between what was and what comes next. Odysseus feels their exhaustion as if it were his own. 10 years of war, of endless waiting before the gates, of fire and dust and strategy. 10 years of longing for home. And now, when the world should feel lighter, it feels heavier instead. He wonders if peace is a thing one must relearn, slowly, like walking after too many days at sea. As the sun climbs higher, He climbs aboard his ship, the proud black vessel with carved eyes at the bow, meant to see through storm and night. The timbers creak beneath his sandals, and the deck glistens with dew. A dozen hands set to work, ropes uncoiled, oars positioned, sails ready to rise. The air fills with the rhythm of preparation, that ancient dance between man and sea. Before departure, he kneels and pours a libation, a small cup of wine into the waves. "For you, Poseidon," he murmurs, voice low but steady. "May you grant us safe passage home." The sea swirls, taking the offering, giving no answer. They push from the shore. The oars bite the water, and the ship glides forward. Behind them, Troy shrinks to a shadow on the horizon, its smoke dissolving into the sky. Odysseus keeps his eyes on that fading shape, not from sorrow, but from habit, the warrior's instinct to never turn his back on what once held danger. Only when the shore is gone does he breathe freely. The men hoist the sail, and it fills with wind, snapping gently, carrying them toward the open expanse of the Aegean. The sea is calm for now, glassy and pale. The sunlight dances across it like molten gold. Hours pass in rhythm, oars dipping, water whispering, gulls circling high above. The sound of it all begins to soothe the men, the first real peace they have known in years. Someone hums a tune, something old and wistful, and soon the others join, their voices rough but warm. The melody drifts over the water like a prayer, carrying hope toward the horizon. Odysseus listens, eyes half closed. He feels the gentle roll beneath his feet, the salt spray on his lips, the endless heartbeat of the sea. It is both friend and stranger, unpredictable, alive, ancient. He cannot help but feel small before it, and yet this is where he has always belonged. By midday, the fleet begins to scatter, each captain steering toward his own home, some north, some east. The war has bound them together, but peace will pull them apart. Farewell calls rise across the waves, voices fading with distance. Odysseus lifts a hand in silent parting. "May the winds favour you," he says under his breath, though no one can hear. When at last his ship sails alone, Ithaca becomes not just a destination, but an idea, a place built of memory and promise. He tells his men stories of its harbours, its cliffs draped with olive groves, its hearth smoke rising gently through morning mist. The younger sailors listen wide-eyed, as though hearing of paradise. The older ones close their eyes, letting the words paint the island in their minds. As twilight begins to fall, the sky turns the colour of honey and coral. The sea darkens to indigo. A thin crescent moon appears, trembling on the horizon. They light a small lantern at the prow, its flame flickering against the breeze. The oars rest for now. The sail holds steady. Odysseus stands alone at the stern. The air cools, carrying the faint scent of pine from some unseen shore. He thinks of Penelope, her patience, her quiet strength. He imagines his son, Telemachus, nearly grown, perhaps wondering if his father still walks among the living. The thought softens him, warms him, even against the night chill. A seabird glides low beside the ship, its wings silver in the moonlight. For a heartbeat, Odysseus takes it as a sign, a silent blessing, perhaps from Athena, who once favoured him. He bows his head slightly. "Guide me home," he whispers. The stars emerge, one by one, their light trembling on the waves. The men settle into sleep, curled near the mast, wrapped in cloaks that still smell faintly of war smoke. The sea hums beneath them. a lullaby older than kingdoms. Odysseus remains awake, eyes tracing constellations. He finds the Great Bear, the same one that guided sailors long before him. Its slow turn comforts him, proof that even in chaos, some things remain constant. For the first time in years, he allows himself to hope. But somewhere beyond the dark horizon, the gods are already stirring. The wind that has carried them so gently begins to shift, only slightly at first, like a sigh. Clouds gather, thin as silk. The scent of rain brushes the air. Odysseus feels it and frowns. He has lived too long with omens not to recognize one. He closes his eyes, hearing the whisper of the waves, soft, almost kind, but layered with something else beneath it. A promise, a warning. And far out at sea, unseen by mortal eyes, a hand of wind begins to turn. All night the sea breathed evenly, a patient animal sleeping beneath the stars. Yet before dawn, a faint tremor moved through the stillness, a change so delicate it might have been imagined. Odysseus felt it along the rail, in the coolness gathering on the back of his hands, in the hush that fell over the sail, as if the canvas were listening too. He lifted his eyes to the rim of the world, where a thin band of cloud began to bloom like milk poured into dark water. "Rouse the crew," he said softly, "not in haste. Let it be a quiet waking." The men stirred from their blankets, blinking at the dim light. Oars were checked, ropes loosened. A lantern was capped to a glow. No one spoke loudly. Even laughter, when it came, was barely more than breath, as though they wished not to disturb a house where children slept. Odysseus moved among them with a hand to a shoulder here, a steady word there. He sensed their trust and felt the answering weight of it, not heavy, but real, like a cloak placed across the back before evening cool. By the time the sun's first colour tinged the east, the breeze had turned and lengthened. It came not as a striking force, but as a persistent companion, one that would not be denied. The rigging began to hum. The sea surface peeled into little scales of silver, each a quick flick of light. Far off, a line of darker water ran like a boundary. The sail bellied and strained, the mast gave its deep wooden voice, and the prow cut a determined furrow. "The wind has chosen us," Eurylochus said, squinting toward the shift on the horizon. "Then we answer kindly," Odysseus replied. He spoke it as a principle, to meet what comes without bitterness, to shape one's path around the world rather than demand the world soften to one's wishes. He had learned that at Troy, and long before. The morning wore on in a long, slanted light, and with it the wind grew stubborn, not unkind but restless, tugging at the sail, urging them faster than they had planned. Currents gripped beneath, nudging the keel. The sea was not hostile, it simply had its own mind. Odysseus kept his hands easy on the tiller, feeling for the small answers the ship gave. He loved this part, the conversation between wood and water, the tilt and righting, the small negotiations that, taken together, became a journey. Yet journeys include pause as well as motion, and food as well as wind. Toward midday, a coastline rose, low-backed hills wrapped in green, a ribbon of sand, a harbour open like an offered palm. Ismarus, he thought, city of the Ciconians, a name he had heard on many traders' tongues. After so many weeks at war and the long night at sea, the men needed bread, water, and rest. He wished to arrive as guests, not as conquerors. The war had taken enough. They eased the sail, feathered the oars, and slipped into the shelter of the bay. The water ran clear. The pebbles beneath were blue-grey and smooth as olives. From the shore drifted smells of thyme and warm stone, and the mingled smoke of cooking fires. Children's voices carried faintly, higher than birds but just as light. Odysseus felt something unclench within him at that sound. It had been years since he had heard it, without a trace of fear behind it. They beached the ship on a gentle slope, set watch without fuss, and walked inland with empty hands and open faces. Odysseus wore no helm, no gleaming bronze. He carried only his staff and a pouch for trade. Honey, a coil of fine linen, a small hammered brooch shaped like a hummingbird, beautiful but not grand. They were travellers. That was the truth he wished the wind to carry before them. The first to greet them was an old man leading a donkey laden with baskets of figs. He had a white beard and the courteous eyes of someone who values his neighbours. He regarded the strangers, then smiled, his lines deepening. "You have come with the south wind," he said. "She brings friends more often than not." "Then let us prove her reputation true," Odysseus answered and bowed. "We seek bread and water, a bit of fire for cooking, and your goodwill. In return we have small gifts, and stories if you have patience for them." The old man chuckled. "In harvest time, patience is thin. But bread and water we have. Come, sit where the shade is kind." So it was that they rested on woven mats beneath a canopy of reeds where light fell in broken coins. A woman brought loaves warm from the oven, their crusts dusted with coarse salt. Another set down bowls of olives and a jug of wine thinned with spring water. The men ate with gratitude. How quickly peace reteaches the body to be gentle. Hands slowed, voices softened, shoulders unknotted. Odysseus asked after the well, the market, the best place to purchase grain and oil. He laid out his small goods, the linen, the brooch, a skein of bright-dyed wool the colour of new pomegranate. The people glanced, admired, bartered shyly until they were comfortable, then with pleasant ease. A child climbed into Eurylochus's lap and fell asleep there. The grizzled warrior sat very still, smiling with his eyes. "Isn't it strange," Odysseus thought, "how quickly the heart remembers what it means to be unafraid?" But even good hours pass, as water passes through fingers, and the wind outside the cove began to pull on the reeds, as if reminding them of a promise. In the afternoon, clouds shouldered over the hills, big and wool-soft, their undersides violet with rain. The old man's donkey flicked its ears and turned toward home. "You will want to be away before night," he said gently. "This wind will not sleep, and the moon will hide early." Odysseus paid fairly, offered thanks, and set the men to load stores with deliberate care. Jars wedged where they would not break, sacks balanced so they would not shift and bruise. He pressed a small coin into the palm of the boy who had slept, and into the hand of the woman who had poured the wine he left the hummingbird brooch, which she accepted with a startled shake of her head and a grateful look that Odysseus felt under his ribs. They launched at twilight. The shore withdrew again, green into grey, grey into blue, until the harbour was a line, then a dot, then a memory. The wind waited as if to let their gratitude settle, then took their sail in both hands and drew them out. Night fell quickly. The sky's first star was shy, the second arrived bolder, and then the rest spilled free. The ocean turned to ink, but it was not an empty black. It held a depth like velvet, quietly alive with reflected points of light. The ship moved as a body in sleep, shoulders rising and sinking in a slow dream. Oars were stowed. The men found their places, speaking softly, stories low and round-edged as river stones. Yet the wind would not rest. It grew into itself the way fire does when fed, though this was no fire. It had a cool, clean edge, like mountain air. It did not batter. It persuaded. The sail sang against its rigging. The mast answered with a note that lived in the belly more than the ear. The prow shivered, reached and cut on, a needle threading some vast, dark cloth. Odysseus kept the tiller and watched the black line of the horizon turn to a curve, then to a presence, a something in the night where waves rose shouldered, then slumped away as though great sleepers rolled beneath them. He measured and corrected, felt the ship's language down his arms. When he was uncertain, he listened. Listening had saved him more times than strength. He thought, as the hours went, of his island, of the olive tree rooted by his hall, with bark like twisted cord, of Penelope's long patience, her hands, clever hands, passing thread through loom like day through time. He thought of Telemachus, whose infant fist once clasped Odysseus's finger as if to anchor him. He imagined the boy nearing manhood, walking the cliffs, naming the winds that combed the grass, hoping and fearing in equal measure. Hope has its own weather, he mused. Some nights it is a warm breeze, others a brisk, bracing gale. Sleep, he told Eurylochus at last. I will wake you if I waver. And who wakes you? Came the quiet answer. The stars, Odysseus said, smiling, and if they become shy, the sea will remind me. So it went until the hour before dawn, when even crickets fall silent. Then the wind shifted a single point and gathered itself as a runner bunches before the leap. The ship rose, not sharply, but with an insistence that smoothed the breath from their chests. A lace of spray touched faces, left them cool and bright. The men woke without being called. They took their stations with that unspoken consent crews share when weather writes the orders. For 9 days, a long breath measured by moon and sun, the wind would not be argued with. It neither raged nor relented. It carried them past the stations they knew. A certain crooked clump of stars at 1 midnight, a peculiar blue to the water on a 2nd noon, the far-off smell of rain that never reached them on a 3rd evening. A gull joined them for part of a day, keened once, and was gone. Sometimes the sea was a page written tight with ripples. Sometimes it was flat as polished slate. But always the wind, the steady companion with its hand at their back. In such travelling, the mind learns to quiet itself. The men fell into a kindness with one another born of rhythm, passing a cup, sharing a cloak, pointing out a line of dolphins that rose and slipped and rose again, with the lazy play of creatures who need not hurry. Someone told a story in which a fisherman loved a star. Someone else hummed a nursery tune learned long ago on a mother's knee. Odysseus listened and let the words polish him smooth. He did not push against the hours. He let them shine him down to patience. On the morning of the 10th day, the sea changed colour, not markedly, but as the eye of a friend does when a thought moves through it. A paleness like green tea appeared under the surface. The smell of the air altered, as if a distant garden had begun to bloom. The wind softened for the first time, stroking rather than urging. The men lifted their heads, sniffed, and smiled without quite knowing why. Land, said Eurylochus, though none could see it yet. He spoke the word as if it were a memory that remembered them back. They sighted it by mid-morning, a low island, folded and quiet, wrapped in a haze that made its edges gentle. No cliffs cut at the sky, no smoke lifted from farms. The shore lay open, with small inlets like cup hollows in a palm. The waters around it were a bright, inviting blue, and near the sand they turned to clear glass. In the shallows, the bottom lay strewn with smooth white stones that seemed to glow from within. "It looks like a place that has forgotten harm," said one of the younger sailors softly. Odysseus felt the same thought pass through him, a pleasant draught under a door. Yet he had not come so far by trusting surfaces. He watched the birds. There were few, and they wheeled lazily, without haste or complaint. He watched the sea. It held no cross-current to warn them away. He watched the clouds, high and thin, like silk laid across the sky by a careful hand. Everything spoke of ease. "Let us not rush even into comfort," he said, smiling. "We will approach as the morning approaches, step by step." They furled the sail until it was a white shoulder against the mast, then shipped the oars and glided in at a respectful pace. The keel ticked lightly on sand and stilled. The men jumped into warm, knee-deep water, laughed without fear, and pulled the ship halfway onto the beach. The laughter was not loud. It had an airy sound, like seeds shaken in a dry pod. They found a spring behind a curtain of tall grasses, its water cool and sweet, banded with tiny ferns. They filled skins, washed salt from their faces, and cupped their hands to drink. The taste was like rain collected on a clean stone. A grove of low trees stood near, leaves round and green, and beyond it lay a meadow with flowers tilted to the sun. The petals were pale as shells. Bees worked there, slow and content, and their humming was exactly the pitch of rest. As they walked, a perfume came to them, not strong, not complicated. It suggested honey, and sunlight on linen, and the faintest hint of orange peel. The scent did not float from any one blossom. Rather, it seemed to rise from the air itself, as steam rises from warm bread. They paused, breathed in, and released the breath like a held burden laid down. "What island is this?" a sailor murmured. "Sometimes names come after welcome," Odysseus said. "Let us be guests of the shore first." Near the meadow's edge, two figures approached, slender, barefooted, expressions open as dawn. Their garments were simple and loose, dyed the colour of wheat. They carried baskets not with urgency, but with something like happiness, as though carrying were its own reward. When they reached the visitors, they bowed easily and extended the baskets, which were heaped with pale, round leaves and small golden fruits that shone as though lit within. "Food?" asked one of Odysseus's men, kindly and cautious. "Food," the taller figure echoed, and the word itself felt like a blessing for all who were tired. Odysseus accepted a leaf, turned it between finger and thumb. It was soft and faintly sticky with a sap that smelled of summer's end. He thought of the gifts from Ismarus, the goodwill that had met them at the well. Then he thought of winds that change without warning, of how peace sometimes asks us to remember where we are going even while we rest. "Thank you," he said, and handed it to a sailor who had been seasick for 2 days. "Eat, friend, but only a little. Then we'll light a small fire and make a simple meal." The sailor smiled, took the leaf in both hands, and bit gently. His eyes softened at once, lids lowering, not with sleep, but with the lightness that comes when a thought you did not know you were carrying sets itself down. "Captain," he whispered, voice full of wonder. For a moment I could not recall why we hurried. It seemed enough to be here. Odysseus felt a thread of caution draw through him, fine as hair. He thanked their hosts again, offered a flask of water from the spring, and made pleasant talk. Whence they had come, how fair the day was, what flowers bloomed. The figures listened with calm delight, and occasionally offered the leaves to another man, and then another. Smiles spread like warmth through wool. Careful, Odysseus said cheerfully but firmly. Eat after we cook. We keep our habits even on kind shores. Habits hold a man to himself, he thought, the way knots hold a sail. The smallest loosenings can invite a wind to unmake what you meant to keep. They gathered driftwood and set a modest flame in a hollow of sand protected from the breeze. Someone set a pot from the ship over it. Another fetched lentils. Another added a sprig of thyme from Ismaros, the scent rising to meet the meadow's sweetness. The men spoke softly while the stew simmered and thickened. They ate from wooden bowls, grateful for simple heat. And yet the island's quiet presence, the haze, the humming bees, the perfume in the air, continued to smooth the edges of memory, to stroke away urgency as one might stroke worry from a child's brow. Odysseus ate last, as was his habit when caution knocked. He looked toward the ship, toward the track of their keel in the wet sand, then out across the water to the faint seam where the sky began. Home lay there, he reminded himself gently. A wife's lamp, a son's question, a door he had built with his own measured hands. He rose and dusted sand from his cloak. We will thank our hosts, he announced, and set a small watch. Then we rest in the shade until the sun leans west. The two figures smiled as if they approved of watches, of measured rest, of men who carried their own compass. They nodded, and one gestured toward the meadow's far side where the grass grew higher, as if offering a softer nest of shade. A few sailors followed them without asking leave, mesmerized by the promise of comfort as such. Odysseus let them go a little way, then called back with a warmth that held iron beneath. Stay where the spring sings, friends. We keep to our fire. They returned, a little sheepish and yet untroubled. The breeze moved over them like a cool hand. The leaves in the baskets shone, and the golden fruit gleamed, and the bees murmured, and somewhere a small wave fell and refell on the shore, an old clock that kept no time but peace. Strange island, Eurylochus murmured. Strange, Odysseus agreed, and gentle. Let us be gentle in turn. But let us also remember the wind that brought us. She has not finished her speaking. He looked out across the water, where the bright blue shallows deepened to that familiar indigo, and beyond it, to the seam of the world. His chest filled not with worry, but with a careful readiness, the way a sail fills when a breeze that was playful becomes purposeful. The men lay down one by one, heads pillowed on their rolled cloaks, faces turned to striped shade. Their breathing slowed. Even the watchman found his eyes lowering without fear. The island's perfume threaded the air with warmth, and for a time the ship herself seemed to drowse on the sand. Odysseus sat with his back to the mast, mind quiet but not unmoored. He touched the hilt of his knife as one touches a beloved tool, not out of threat, but to recall its weight. He traced in his thoughts the shape of Ithaca's cliffs, the curve of the cove where fishermen mended their nets at dusk, the rough stone of his hall, the bed he had carved from living wood. Each memory he tied to a word: Penelope, Telemachus, home. And each word he knotted to his heart, one after another, a sailor's neat work. Because winds change, because some islands seem made of rest, because even a leaf, pale and sweet as summer, can invite a man to forget the door that waits for his hand. The bees droned. The pot steamed softly, then was quiet. The tide stroked the sand and drew away. And somewhere beyond the far curve of the sea, the winds that would not rest shifted once more, a small, far turning, as the island's gifts pressed closer, inviting dreams in which the road itself felt unnecessary, and the thought of home for a drowsy instant seemed like a story told long ago by someone else. The sun climbed slowly over the island, laying soft gold upon the meadow and the sea. When the men awoke, the light was kind and drowsy, and a hush lingered, the sort that makes one hesitate to speak, as if words themselves might break something delicate. The air was thick with sweetness. From the grove came the scent of blossoms, honey, and something else, something almost invisible, yet more potent than either. It was the scent of forgetting. Odysseus rose before the others. He rinsed his face at the spring and tasted the water. Still cool, still true. He watched the sea through the reeds. The tide had shifted a finger's width higher, as if the island itself were breathing in. The ship waited there, black hull glistening, oars stacked, obedient, ready. But the men were not ready. They lingered in the grass, laughing softly, hands sticky from the golden fruit offered by their gentle hosts. One sailor leaned back against a stone, eyes half closed. Another had begun to hum, the same slow tune he had sung aboard ship, but now without longing. The sound was easy, lazy, almost content. Odysseus walked among them, speaking quietly. Fill the water jars, mend the sail ropes. The sea is waiting. No one moved. Eurylochus smiled at him, a weary, pleasant smile. Captain, what is the rush? The wind has left us for now. Let us stay a little longer. The air here feels like home, doesn't it? Odysseus studied him. The man's eyes, once sharp as polished bronze, now seemed clouded, soft and unfocused, like eyes that looked inward rather than out. Around him, the others nodded in lazy agreement, their gestures slow as drifting leaves. He crouched and picked one of the fruits from the basket. Small, golden, perfect. He turned it in his hand. The scent was warm and floral, and his fingers came away with a faint shimmer, like dew at sunrise. He had seen enchantments before. This one was gentler than any curse, more dangerous because it whispered rather than commanded. He pressed his thumb against the skin until it broke. Inside, the flesh gleamed pale and fragrant. He touched it to his lips, only a taste, no more than curiosity, and felt at once the edge of it, the way time seemed to ease, the way the sea's distant roar folded into silence. For a heartbeat, he saw Ithaca not as a longing, but as a shadow, something half remembered. He dropped the fruit. It fell soundlessly into the grass. Men, he said, his voice quiet but steady. We must go. No answer. A few smiled dreamily, as though he had spoken of a thing no longer needed, a journey belonging to someone else. Listen to me, he said again, kneeling among them now. Do you not remember home? Your wives, your children, the olive groves, the hearths. A murmur rippled through the group, uncertain, like wind teasing tall grass. One man frowned faintly. Another blinked as if trying to recall something far away. Home, Odysseus said once more. The word itself seemed to carry weight, striking through the haze like an oar through still water. We are not meant to sleep here. We are men of the sea, not of dreams. He stood and clapped his hands sharply. Eurylochus, to the ship! The command cracked across the calm air, startling a few awake. Eurylochus hesitated, confusion flickering, then memory, slow, reluctant. He looked toward the horizon and whispered, Ithaca. The word trembled like the first breath of dawn after a long night. With that, the spell began to thin. Odysseus moved quickly, gathering his men, guiding them with firm hands. Those who resisted, he lifted bodily, carrying them toward the shore, though not unkindly. They wept softly, begging to stay, to dream just a little longer. But he did not answer. He only looked toward the sea, whose waves were now curling with a quiet urgency, as though urging him onward. The golden figures who had offered the fruit watched from the meadow, their faces serene, untroubled. They did not follow. They did not plead. They merely watched, smiling faintly, like teachers observing a child who has learned something he will never quite forget. When the men reached the ship, Odysseus called, All aboard! The oars dipped into the water with small, reluctant splashes. The ship eased away from the sand, its shadow sliding free from the island's embrace. As they drifted outward, the air grew lighter, the sweetness fading, replaced by clean salt and open wind. Behind them, the island shone under the full light of the sun, peaceful, eternal, untouched by sorrow or ambition, a place where time itself had chosen to rest. Odysseus stood at the stern, one hand on the tiller, and watched it diminish into the blue distance. He thought of how easily peace can become a prison when one forgets to measure it against purpose. He turned to his men, most of whom sat silent, blinking as though waking from a long, kind dream. Remember this, he said softly. Not all comforts are blessings. Some are cages with golden bars. The sea caught their hull again, steady and sure. The wind returned, not harsh, but real. It filled the sail with a deep breath, as if the world itself had exhaled. The men looked at him, weary, penitent, but awake. One began to hum again, the tune now slower, shaped by longing rather than ease. It wound through the air, threading itself with the rhythm of the oars. Odysseus smiled faintly. The spell was broken, but its lesson would linger, quiet as the taste of honey on the tongue. He lifted his eyes to the horizon, endless, waiting, alive. The sea's colour deepened to blue-green, streaked with sunlight. Somewhere ahead lay the next trial, though he did not yet know its shape. For now, it was enough to feel motion again, the world returning to its pulse beneath their feet. The ship cut through the waves with grace, the wind curling gently around them like a promise. Above, the gulls wheeled once more, their cries bright against the open air. Odysseus turned to the men and said, Row steady. Let the sea remember us as travellers who never slept too long in one place. And the ship, obedient and free, answered the command with the rhythm of oars striking true water, the heartbeat of men who had remembered who they were. The island faded, its golden haze dissolving into the horizon. Night would come again soon, and with it new winds, new whispers, and the endless call of home. The sea lay smooth for many days after the island of forgetfulness faded behind them. The men rowed without complaint now, their strokes steady, their eyes alive again with purpose. Each dawn arrived like a soft reopening of the world. New light, new air, new chance. The scent of the lotus still lingered faintly in their memory, but it was no longer a lullaby. It was a reminder. The stars guided them by night, and the winds favoured them for a time. Dolphins followed their wake, silver shapes leaping through the foam, playful and curious. Odysseus would sometimes watch them and smile, for they seemed to know no sorrow, and yet in their freedom he saw a reflection of what all sailors secretly desired: motion without burden, journey without cost. But freedom has its price, and the sea does not offer it without testing. One morning, as the mist was lifting and the horizon grew pale with light, a dark coastline appeared, craggy and uneven, rising like the broken teeth of a sleeping giant. The cliffs were streaked with strange colours, ochres and greys, and caves opened along their sides, deep and shadowed. A single column of smoke twisted lazily upward from somewhere inland, but there were no signs of men, no boats, no voices carried by the wind. Odysseus studied the shape of the land, narrowing his eyes. "That place," he said quietly, "has secrets, but perhaps also food and water. The men are tired. We'll go ashore with care." The ship crept toward the coast, the water darkening as they neared the cliffs. The air smelled faintly of wild herbs and ash. They found a small inlet where the rocks formed a natural harbour and pulled the vessel onto the shingle. The men stretched their limbs, breathing in the earth's scent after so long at sea. Eurylochus looked inland. "It feels empty," he murmured. "Not dead, but watching." Odysseus nodded. A land of silence. Such places always listen. He chose 12 men, the bravest and most cautious, to explore with him. They carried spears, not in menace, but in prudence, and a small skin of dark wine, strong and sweet, gifted by the priest of Apollo in Ismarus. Odysseus slung it over his shoulder, thinking it might serve as offering or comfort, whichever the day required. The path from the shore wound upward between rough stones and patches of pale grass. Wild goats grazed on the slopes, unafraid of men. "See how they do not flee," Odysseus said softly. "They've never learned fear. This land has no hunters." The further they climbed, the stranger the silence grew. There were no birds here, only the wind whispering through cracks in the rocks. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and smoke. At last, they came upon a great clearing where the ground dipped like a shallow bowl. In its centre stood a cave, vast, with a mouth so high that sunlight barely touched its roof. Around it were pens built from enormous branches and stones. Inside them grazed sheep and goats, larger than any they had ever seen, their coats gleaming white as sea foam. The men stared, wonder and unease mingling in their faces. "A herdsman of giants," whispered one. Odysseus motioned for quiet. If he tends his flocks, he may also have milk, cheese, fire. We'll wait and see what manner of creature lives here. They entered the cave's mouth. Inside it was cool and dim, and the air smelled of straw and smoke. Huge cheeses rested on wooden racks, round as shields. Milk jugs stood in rows, each large enough to bathe a child. Near the fire pit were baskets of olives and heaps of kindling stacked like tree trunks. The men's eyes grew wide. "Let's take what we need and go," one whispered. But Odysseus shook his head. "No. Hospitality is sacred. Better to meet the master and ask. Perhaps he will offer freely." They lit a small torch and waited. Outside, The bleating of sheep drifted closer, slow and rhythmic, like waves returning to shore. Then came another sound, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, shaking the ground slightly with each step. The men froze. From the cave entrance, a shadow grew, enormous and uneven. The torchlight flickered against it. Then, into the dim fireglow, stepped the being who ruled this lonely place. He was taller than any man, broad as a tree trunk, his hair thick and coarse. One great eye blazed from the center of his forehead, bright, unblinking, filled with a strange intelligence. He carried a bundle of wood in one arm, and a staff so large it might have been a ship's mast. The men trembled, but Odysseus raised a hand, calm as still water. "Peace, friends. We come as travellers, blown by wind and need. We mean no harm." The giant's gaze fell upon them, curious rather than furious. His voice, when it came, was slow and deep, like a stone sliding across the sea floor. "Strangers," he said, "men, small and restless, why enter my home uncalled?" Odysseus bowed slightly. "Because the world is wide, and kindness can live anywhere. We sought food and shelter. We would pay fairly, or trade as you wish." The Cyclops tilted his head, his single eye narrowing. "Trade?" He sniffed the air. "You smell of salt and iron. The sea clings to you. I have milk and fire and flocks. But what have you that I need?" Odysseus lifted the wineskin from his shoulder. "A gift," he said, "a drink from the vineyards of men. Sweet, strong, a comfort on long nights." He poured a small cupful and offered it. The giant took it in one hand, his fingers thick as branches, and drank. The liquid vanished down his throat, and for a moment his great face softened. "Sweet," he murmured, "like sun and sleep." Another. Odysseus poured again, and again the Cyclops drank. The deep rumble of his breathing slowed, his eye half closed. "What name, sailor?" he asked, voice heavy now, as though the wine had wrapped itself around his mind. "Call me no one," said Odysseus, smiling faintly. The giant nodded, swaying slightly. "No one," he repeated. "A good name for a man who drifts where he will." His great hand gestured vaguely toward the exit, as though granting permission. "Go when you wish. The sheep will not mind." Then he sat, leaned his head against the cave wall, and drifted into a slumber that sounded like the sea inside a mountain. Odysseus motioned to his men. Quietly, carefully, they gathered what food they could: cheeses, dried meat, a few pails of milk. They left gifts in return: a small coil of rope, a bronze knife, the last of their bread. The balance of guest and host was restored, however unevenly. Before they left, Odysseus looked back at the sleeping giant. "Even monsters," he murmured, "dream of peace." They slipped into the night, moving silently down the stony path. The stars had risen, cold, bright, eternal. Behind them, the Cyclops slept on, the echoes of his breath rolling through the hills like distant thunder. When they reached the ship, the men exhaled at last, their voices low and trembling with relief. "You gave him your name?" Eurylochus asked. "No," Odysseus said, smiling. "I gave him a story. Sometimes that is safer." The sail rose again under the moon's pale light. The wind, gentle once more, caught it and carried them out to sea. Behind them, the dark cliffs faded into the horizon, their shadows folding like wings. The men spoke softly of what they had seen, not in fear, but in awe. The world, they realized, was far larger than war and home and the narrow dreams of men. Somewhere beyond reason walked beings who lived between myth and truth, tending their flocks in solitude, knowing nothing of empires or kings. Odysseus listened, saying little. His mind was already turning ahead to whatever waited beyond the next tide. For the sea, like the gods, never tells its plans. It only whispers them, one horizon at a time. The sea, ever patient, carried them onward after the land of giants had fallen behind, a shadow folded into mist. For many nights and days, the winds turned kindly. They filled the sails without fury, whispering through the ropes like friendly voices. The oars dipped in rhythm, smooth and sure. Even the gulls followed, as if to bless the journey. Odysseus stood at the helm often, his eyes scanning the horizon not for threat, but for the next promise. The air was soft, the stars clear. Each evening, the men spoke in low, easy tones, tales of youth, of fields and hearths, of small, ordinary things they hoped to touch again. Then one dawn, a strange scent drifted across the water, something bright and sharp, like rain meeting stone, mingled with the faintest hum of music. The sky ahead shimmered faintly, and within that shimmer appeared the shape of an island unlike any they had seen before. Its cliffs rose like pillars of cloud, soft yet radiant, and from them streamed 1,000 invisible threads of wind. They danced through the air like silver ribbons, twining, separating, joining again. The very sea around it seemed alive, rippling not from tide, but from the breath of the air itself. Eurylochus shielded his eyes. "Is it smoke?" Odysseus shook his head. "No, it's the wind made visible. We've come to the Isle of Aeolus, the keeper of all breezes, calm and storm alike." The men watched, half in awe, half in fear. They had heard the stories of Aeolus, the master who could command the gales as a shepherd commands his flock, binding them in bags or setting them free across the world. It was said his halls were built from ivory and cloud, his table laden with food that never spoiled, his laughter echoing like thunder softened by distance. As their ship neared the shore, the water grew strangely still, not glassy but balanced, as though every ripple had agreed to pause. The air held no temperature at all. It was neither warm nor cold. Odysseus felt it touch his skin like a thought rather than a breeze. "Lower the sail," he said quietly. "Let the island take us in its own way." They drifted toward a harbour shaped like a crescent moon. On the sand stood figures that shimmered, not fully human, not spirit either. They wore robes woven from the air itself, their hair moving, though no wind stirred it. When they spoke, their voices were soft, like breath caught in a shell. "Welcome, wanderers," one said. "The Lord of Winds has seen your course and grants you rest." The men followed them up a path that spiraled through bright rock and flowering vines that swayed without sound. At its summit stood the palace of Aeolus, walls of pale stone veined with light, doors of gold that opened silently, and within, a hall whose air seemed to breathe. At the far end sat Aeolus himself, a figure both grand and gentle, his eyes bright as the morning sky. His beard flowed like cirrus cloud, his robe a tapestry of shifting hues, grey, white, silver, and faint gold. Around him, the air shimmered and sighed, carrying the sense of distant storms and far-off shores. He rose as they approached, his voice warm as a summer wind. Odysseus of Ithaca, he said, whose name rides the whispers of the sea. You are welcome in my halls. Odysseus bowed. Lord of winds, we thank you. We are weary travellers, seeking only safe passage home. Aeolus smiled. The sea is generous and cruel in equal measure. But you are a friend to wit, and wit is the sailor's truest compass. Come, sit, eat, let the air renew you. They were led to a long table where dishes appeared as though conjured by thought, fruits glistening with dew, bread still warm, meats fragrant with herbs. The men ate and drank, laughter returning to their voices. For a time, it seemed they had found a place untouched by misfortune, where every sound was gentle and every breath was ease. When the feast was done, Aeolus asked them of their travels, and Odysseus told him, not all, but enough, the war, the long return, the islands of temptation and danger. Aeolus listened intently, his gaze fixed and kind. The sea loves you, he said at last, but love is not always mercy. The winds serve her moods, and they can be wild. Yet if I bind them for you, you may cross her back unharmed. Ithaca lies far west, beyond the temper of Poseidon, if you are swift and wise. He clapped his hands, and from a side chamber came his servants, airy beings with eyes like stars. They carried between them a great leather bag, tied with silver cord. Inside, the air stirred faintly, whispering as though it longed to be free. Aeolus laid a hand upon it. Here are all the winds that could harm you, the storm winds, the tearing gusts, the whispers that lure ships astray. I have bound them here for your sake. Guard them well, Odysseus, and let none open it until you see your home with your own eyes. Odysseus knelt. I will keep it close and sacred. The god smiled. I trust your mind, but beware human hearts. Curiosity is a strong wind too. That night they slept within Aeolus's halls, their dreams light as feathers. The air around them sang softly, not of warning, but of promise. And when dawn came, they departed with blessings, the leather bag lashed securely beneath Odysseus's bench. The journey resumed under skies of perfect blue. The men rowed with joy, their spirits lifted. For 9 days, the sea remained calm, the wind steady and kind. Ithaca drew nearer. Odysseus could almost see it in his mind. The cliffs, the green slopes, the smoke curling from Penelope's hearth. He did not sleep. He steered by night, eyes fixed on the stars, heart steady. But on the 10th night, exhaustion overtook him. His lids grew heavy, his breath slow. At last, believing the danger past, he gave command of the tiller to Eurylochus and drifted into sleep. The bag lay near his feet, its leather gleaming softly in the moonlight. The men glanced at it often. They had felt its whispering, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat beneath the hide. What treasure does our captain hoard? Murmured one. Gold from Aeolus? Jewels for his queen? Or perhaps it holds the breath of fortune itself, another said with a low laugh. Why should we starve while he alone keeps such wealth? Eurylochus frowned but said nothing. The sea was calm, the stars steady. Temptation is quietest when the night is soft. At last, one man reached for the cord. A peak, no more, he whispered. We'll close it again before he wakes. The knot came loose with a sigh. And then the bag exhaled. The air that burst forth was no treasure but fury, a roaring, spiralling storm that had waited, patient and bound, too long. The deck lurched, the mast groaned, The sail snapped like thunder. Odysseus awoke to chaos. The sea writhing, the stars blotted out. He grasped the tiller, shouting orders that vanished in the wind's scream. But it was too late. The ship spun, lifted, flung across the waves as if caught in the hands of invisible giants. For a day and night, the storm carried them, back, away from home, until the air itself grew thin and the clouds broke open. When at last the fury ended, they found themselves adrift before the same shimmering cliffs, the Isle of Iolus once more. Odysseus fell to his knees upon the deck, his face pale, his heart heavy with shame. Aeolus came to the shore, sorrow in his eyes. "You have returned too soon, son of Ithaca. I gave you calm, yet you could not keep it. The winds are not toys for mortal hands. I cannot aid you twice." The god turned away, and with him, the island faded once more into mist. Odysseus bowed his head. "The sea teaches harshly," he said, "but the lesson will hold." He turned to his men, their faces weary, remorseful. "The winds are free again," he said gently. "So must we be, and wiser for it." They raised the sail once more, the breeze now uncertain, the air tinged with salt and regret. Yet somewhere beneath the sorrow was resolve, a quieter wind, born of understanding. The sea stretched before them, endless as ever. The oars dipped once more, and their song was slower now, but deeper. They would learn again to trust the world, and each other. And far ahead, unseen but waiting, another island began to take shape in the haze, one that smelled of cedar smoke and strange enchantments. For many days the sea wandered without direction, a blue wilderness that seemed to have forgotten north and south. The oars dipped quietly, the men too tired now for songs. They spoke little, not from anger, but from the kind of silence that follows great mistakes. The winds had left them. The sky was a pale wash of silver, the horizon blurred into itself. Odysseus stood at the helm and thought of home, not as distance, but as a pulse, faint yet constant, somewhere beyond sight. Each evening, when the light softened, he poured a small libation into the sea and whispered to it, "Teach me, not punish me." The waves would answer with a sigh, neither cruel nor kind. On the seventh dawn after leaving Aeolus, the air changed. The sea, though calm, seemed to carry a scent, not salt alone, but herbs and smoke and something sweet, like crushed petals. A faint haze lay upon the horizon, tinged with rose and gold. Eurylochus was first to notice. "Another island," he murmured, his voice wary. "How many tests lie hidden in this sea?" Odysseus shaded his eyes. "All tests teach," he said softly, "and every shore holds its own lesson." As they drew closer, the island revealed itself. Green hills veiled in morning mist, streams glinting like threads of glass, trees heavy with fruit that glowed softly in the sun. Birds with long tails of sapphire and gold darted between the branches. The air itself seemed alive, pulsing gently, as though the island breathed. They anchored in a quiet bay where the sand shone pale as ivory. The water was so clear that they could see fish moving beneath, their scales flashing like coins. From somewhere inland came the sound of laughter, light, musical, distant. The men looked to Odysseus. "Do we go ashore?" one asked. "We do," he replied, "but carefully. Not all laughter is joy. They drew the ship onto the beach and divided their company, half to guard the vessel, half to explore. Odysseus remained with the ship at first, for his instincts were restless. He sent Eurylochus to lead the search party, reminding him to keep his wits sharper than his blade. As the group disappeared into the forest, the quiet deepened. The sea lapped softly at the sand. The wind stirred the leaves with a sound like whispering silk. Odysseus watched the tree line, feeling the strange stillness of the island wrap around him. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. Beauty, he knew, was a language that could mean many things. Hours passed. The sun tilted west, and still his men did not return. A small unease began to grow within him, the kind that starts not in fear, but in the heartbeat, quickening by instinct. He rose, took his sword and bow, and called one of the youngest sailors to follow. "We'll go as far as the stream," he said. "If they found hospitality, we'll join them. If not—" He did not finish the sentence. The path wound through the forest, the air heavy with fragrance, thyme, myrtle, and a sweetness like honey warmed by sun. The trees seemed to lean toward them, their leaves brushing their shoulders, their trunks smooth and faintly warm, as if alive. Then the forest opened into a clearing, and there stood a great stone house, its walls draped with flowering vines, its roof gleaming like polished copper. Smoke drifted from its chimney, curling lazily into the blue air. From within came the sound of singing, soft, low, and hauntingly beautiful. At the threshold sat a woman. Her hair was dark as midnight, her skin touched with gold. Around her moved small creatures, lions, wolves, and sleek panthers. But their eyes were calm, and they lay at her feet as pets might. When she saw Odysseus, she smiled, and the expression was neither welcoming nor dangerous, simply knowing. "You have come far," she said, her voice like cool water running over stone, "and your men are already at peace within my hall." Odysseus's breath caught. "At peace. Eating, drinking, sleeping," she said lightly. "Do not fear. They are well cared for." He stepped forward slowly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "And you, lady, who are you that you offer such care to strangers?" The woman's eyes held both mischief and melancholy. "Some call me Circe," she said, "daughter of Helios, mistress of herbs and transformation. I welcome all who arrive weary, for all who travel the sea are my kin." He studied her, the grace of her hands, the quiet power in her stillness. "Transformation," he repeated softly. "What kind?" "The kind each soul most needs," she answered. A soft wind moved through the clearing then, carrying the scent of her garden, bay leaves, lavender, and something sharper, metallic almost, like stormlight. The lions lifted their heads, watching silently. "Come," she said, rising. "You have not eaten since dawn. Let the sea rest while you do." Odysseus hesitated, but in her tone there was no malice, only calm assurance. Still, he was wary. "I will join you," he said, "but not before I see my men." She inclined her head. "As you wish." He followed her inside. The hall was vast and golden, lit by lamps that burned with steady flame. A long table ran its length, heavy with platters of food, roasted meats, loaves of bread, fruits, and goblets of wine. And there, seated as guests, were his men. Yet something was strange. They ate and drank with slow, dreamlike movements. Their laughter was thick, their eyes distant, and as Odysseus watched, one man raised his cup. drank deeply, and his shape shimmered. His body shrank. His hands grew small and furred. His voice broke into a frightened squeal. A pig stood where a man had been. Odysseus's hand went to his sword, but Circe spoke softly. "Why draw steel in a house of healing?" He met her gaze, steady and fierce. "Undo what you have done." She tilted her head. "Would you deny them peace? They have carried fear too long. Here they need not fight, nor hunger, nor remember." "Peace without memory is not peace," he said. "It is forgetting. And forgetting is another name for death." For a long moment, she said nothing. The lamps flickered, casting her face in shifting light. Then, softly, almost reluctantly, she lifted her hand and whispered words older than the sea. One by one the animals shimmered, twisted, and became men again. Dazed, but unharmed. They looked to Odysseus with tears in their eyes, their fear mixing with gratitude. Circe lowered her hand. "You speak truly, Odysseus," she said. "Few do." He sheathed his sword. "You meant no cruelty." "No," she said quietly. "Only rest. But rest can drown those who do not know how to wake." They stood in silence. The lions at her feet shifted, purring softly, their eyes reflecting the firelight. Then she smiled, not the smile of power, but of understanding. "Stay then. Not as captives, but as guests. Eat and heal what the sea has worn away. When you are ready to go, I will not hinder you." And so they stayed. Days passed, or perhaps weeks, for time in Circe's house moved gently, like water over smooth stones. The men regained their strength. Their laughter returned. Not the wild kind born of fear, but quiet, human laughter. They repaired their ship, mended sails, sang old songs. Odysseus, meanwhile, spoke often with Circe. She was not what he expected, not cruel, not gentle, but wise in the way the sea is wise, patient, endless, unafraid of change. She spoke of the stars and the turning of the world, of gods who act like children and mortals who act like gods. "Why help us?" he asked her one night, as they stood by the shore. She gazed toward the horizon where the moonlight shimmered on the waves. "Because even wisdom needs companionship. And because I too know what it is to wait for home." Her words lingered in him long after. When at last the time came to leave, she met him at the water's edge. "Before you go," she said, "you must know the road ahead. It is not straight, nor kind. You will descend into darkness, into the realm of the dead. Only there will you find the counsel you need to return home." Odysseus bowed his head. "Then I will go." She touched his hand lightly, a gesture neither of farewell nor of longing, but of quiet blessing. "Remember this," she said. "Every transformation is a form of remembering. Do not fear the dark. It only asks you to listen." He nodded. "And you, Lady of the Isle, what will you do when we are gone?" She smiled faintly. "What I always do. I will keep the island dreaming until another traveler arrives who needs to remember himself." The wind stirred. The ship waited. Odysseus turned to his men. "We sail at dawn." As they pushed from shore, the waves glowed faintly, as though carrying a farewell light. Circe stood upon the rocks, her hair lifted by the wind, her figure growing small against the sky. The men watched her in silence until she was only a shadow. Then nothing but the scent of her garden carried on the breeze. Odysseus looked back once more, then forward, toward the horizon that now seemed darker, deeper, and filled with quiet voices calling from below. He took the tiller, steady and calm. "Now," he said, "we go to seek the wisdom of the dead." The sea answered with a low, endless sigh, half sorrow, half song. The sea was dark the morning they left Circe's isle, not with storm, but with depth, a blue so deep it seemed to hold its own memory. The air was cool, still carrying the perfume of her gardens. None of the men spoke for a while. Each felt the hush that follows blessing, that tender quiet between a farewell and a new beginning. Circe's words lived in Odysseus's mind. "You must sail where no sunlight dwells. Only there will wisdom speak." He had seen war, deceit, and wonder, yet never the country of silence itself. Still, his heart was calm. To meet the dead was only to meet truth without disguise. They sailed for many nights, following her directions, north, always north, until the warm breezes died and the sea took on the taste of iron. The stars thinned. Even the moon grew pale, as if unwilling to look too long upon that quarter of the world. Mist began to gather, curling low across the water, silver in places and black in others. Eurylochus came to stand beside his captain. "Are we alive still?" he asked softly. Odysseus smiled, faint but real. "As long as we can wonder, we are." The men murmured prayers. They wrapped their cloaks tighter, for though no wind blew, a chill seeped up from the sea itself, quiet and ancient. The waves no longer sparkled. They folded like dark velvet. At last, when the sun should have risen but did not, they saw the coastline, low, grey and endless. No trees, no birds, only a slow curl of smoke, where unseen fires burned without flame. Circe had told him to make land where the river ocean touched the shore of the living world, there to dig a pit and pour libations for the souls below. Odysseus ordered the ship to anchor in the shallows. The oars creaked softly, reluctant to break the stillness. They stepped ashore into sand that was neither warm nor cold, only waiting. The air hung heavy, smelling faintly of wet earth and iron. "Stay close," he said, "and keep your hearts quiet." They climbed a small rise where the ground flattened. There Odysseus drew his bronze sword and, with steady hands, cut a trench the width of his shoulders. Into it he poured milk and honey, then sweet wine, then water, each followed by barley flour. Over the offerings he whispered words of promise, that he sought no power, only counsel, that he honoured the dead as teachers, not as ghosts to be feared. When the last grain fell, a tremor ran through the earth. The air changed, it thickened, deepened, filled with a faint ringing like far-off bells. The men stepped back. From the mist began to form shapes, shadowy figures, not solid, yet not dream. They moved slowly, as if walking through water. Odysseus's heart beat fast but steady. "Stay behind the trench," he told the living. "The dead come hungry for remembrance." He drew from the ship a black ram, as Circe had instructed, and made the offering with solemn hands. The ground drank the blood, and at once the shadows pressed closer, drawn by its warmth. Faces began to take shape. Faces once beloved, once feared. A tall woman moved forward first, her eyes clear, her form outlined in faint light. Odysseus recognized her, and his breath caught. "Mother," he whispered. Anticlea smiled gently, her voice like wind across reeds. "My son," she said, "I waited at the gate for your step." He knelt, the sword still between them to mark the border. "Why did you leave me so soon?" he asked. Her answer was kind. "Your absence was long, and my heart forgot how to hope. But do not grieve. Hope is yours again. It lives in your wife's hands, in your child's eyes. Go back to them." Tears blurred his sight. He could not embrace her. The air between them shimmered like glass, yet warmth touched him nonetheless, not on the skin, but within. Then another figure rose, stern, proud, bearing the calm of old command. Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes. His eyes were dark pools that saw everything but light. "Odysseus," he said, "you have come as Circe foretold. What would you learn?" "The way home," Odysseus answered, "not in distance alone, but in spirit." The prophet nodded. "Then hear. The sea will test you until you understand gentleness more deeply than force. Beware the cattle of the sun. Respect what you cannot own. When at last you reach your island, peace will not wait at the door. You must build it with your own hands, plank by plank, day by day. That is the longest voyage." Odysseus bowed his head. "I will remember." Tiresias raised his staff, tracing a circle in the air. "And remember this, the winds obey no man forever, but the heart that listens may ride any current. Go now, before longing turns to sorrow." The prophet faded, like a candle snuffed. One by one, other shades approached. Companions fallen at Troy, kings long buried, nameless sailors who had once shared his tides. They spoke softly, not of revenge or lament, but of small, human things. The smell of bread, the sound of rain on a tent, the laughter of children. Odysseus listened, realizing that memory itself was the true underworld, a realm of echoes where love and loss walk hand in hand. At last, he called farewell. He covered the trench with earth, offered a final prayer, and the mist began to thin. The figures withdrew like a tide returning to the deep. Only his mother's voice lingered, faint but clear. "Do not let grief become your home." When the last whisper faded, the wind returned, a soft current from the west, smelling faintly of salt and dawn. Eurylochus touched his arm. "Captain," he said, voice trembling, "the sea calls again." Odysseus looked once more at the grey shore. "Then let us answer." They launched the ship into waters as smooth as glass. The oars bit cleanly, and with each stroke the gloom lifted. Slowly, sunlight began to breathe again through the clouds. The men blinked against it, as if seeing light for the first time. Behind them, the land of shadows sank into the horizon, its outline dissolving until only the line between sea and sky remained. For a while, no one spoke. Then one of the younger sailors said quietly, "Were they truly there?" Odysseus smiled a tired, peaceful smile. "If memory can speak, then yes." The breeze strengthened, filling the sail. It smelled of myrtle and open water, not of death. The men straightened their backs, renewed. The world, once again, felt wide. That night, the stars came out brighter than they had in months. The constellations seemed closer, their patterns sharper, as if the dead, content with being remembered, had brushed the heavens clean. Odysseus sat at the stern and watched them, his thoughts slow, his heart steady. He thought of Tiresias's words, "Peace will not wait at the door." He understood now that home was not a place, but a way of being, a listening, a patience, a refusal to let pride steer. The sea, in all its vastness, was not his enemy but his teacher. Eurylochus brought him a cup of watered wine. "To what do we drink?" he asked. Odysseus lifted it gently. "To memory that guides, and to forgetting that forgives." They drank in silence, letting the night wrap them in calm. The ship moved like a heartbeat through the sleeping ocean. By morning, the water had turned the colour of pearl, and the air grew warm again. Birds reappeared, simple, ordinary birds whose wings flashed silver as they skimmed the surface. Their cries sounded like daylight made into sound. The men smiled to hear them. Odysseus felt the heaviness lift from their shoulders. He touched the tiller and whispered, "Thank you," to the sea, not expecting an answer. Yet a small gust rose, playful, ruffling his hair. He laughed softly. The horizon ahead shimmered with promise, and somewhere beyond it, he knew, songs were waiting to be sung. The sea had grown tender again. Each morning opened like a pale flower. Each night closed softly, without storm or dread. After the grey silence of the underworld, the living world felt reborn. The waves brighter, the air warmer, the men lighter in spirit. They spoke more easily now, their laughter natural, their songs low and content. Yet beauty can carry its own kind of danger, and the gods, in their patience, never forget to test those who begin to feel too safe. It was Circe's final warning that guided Odysseus now. Before they departed her island, she had told him of a place where sea and sound intertwined, where voices sweeter than heaven's own choir sang from the rocks. The singers were not mortal nor cruel by intent, yet their music drew the hearts of men as surely as gravity draws the tide. "Beware the Sirens," she'd said, her eyes shadowed by compassion. "Their song is not evil, but it shows you the face of every dream you ever desired. Few who hear it remember who they are." Those words came to him as the wind changed. The morning was bright, but the air carried something new. A stillness beneath the breeze, like a pause before speech. The sea's rhythm slowed. The oars seemed to move through thicker water. Even the gulls were absent. Odysseus, standing at the helm, felt the shift in his bones before he heard it. A single note, faint, distant, like sunlight made sound. Then another and another, weaving together into a melody so pure it seemed to lift the heart from the body. The men faltered at their oars, their faces turning toward the horizon. "What is that?" one whispered. Odysseus's voice was firm but gentle. "The Sirens! Remember Circe's counsel." He reached into a small pouch and drew out a handful of beeswax, softened by the sun. With patient hands, he divided it into pieces, kneading it warm. "Come," he said quietly, "each of you, seal your ears." They obeyed, though curiosity still flickered in their eyes. The wax dulled the world's sounds, turning the surf to a heartbeat, the wind to a whisper. Then Odysseus turned to Eurylochus. "Bind me to the mast, tight, and no matter what I say, do not release me until we are free of the song." Eurylochus frowned. "You would hear it knowing what it can do." Odysseus nodded. "To know temptation is to know one's limits. To master it, one must look upon it without surrender." They tied him fast, rope biting against his palms and wrists, knots firm as destiny. Then, without further word, they set the oars again and rowed onward. At first there was only the shimmer of sea and sky. The horizon blurred, the air thickened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, From the mist, the voices rose. They came not as one chorus, but as many, layered, calling and answering, weaving promises into melody. They sang of home, of glory, of every heart's unspoken wish. Odysseus, great wanderer, beloved of the gods, come ashore, come rest. He closed his eyes, and the song unfolded like silk through his mind. He saw Ithaca, not as memory, but as living vision. Penelope standing at the loom, her hair bright in the firelight. Telemachus grown tall, walking the cliffs with a steady stride. He heard laughter, smelled the sea breeze through the olive trees. The rope strained as he leaned forward. Come home, Odysseus. No toil, no storm, no waiting. Only peace, only love, only the end of wandering. He struggled against the bindings. "Loose me," he cried to his crew, though they could not hear. "Loose me, or we lose the truth of heaven itself." The men rowed on, their faces calm, deaf to both danger and command. Their oars moved with the rhythm of discipline, stroke after stroke, unbroken. The song swelled. It filled the world. The water shimmered like glass. Beneath it, strange shapes glided. Neither fish nor spirit, but something between. He opened his eyes, desperate to see the singers. And there they were, perched upon black rocks that rose like islands themselves, their forms graceful, their hair tangled with seaweed and foam. Their faces were beautiful beyond measure, but not humanly so. They shimmered, changing with each breath, now young, now ancient, now faces of those long lost. He saw his mother among them, her eyes bright with love. He saw comrades fallen at Troy, smiling, calling his name. He saw his own reflection, peaceful and unburdened, walking into golden light. Tears filled his eyes. The world behind him, the ship, the men, the journey, seemed suddenly so small, so far away. He strained harder, the ropes cutting deep. The wood of the mast groaned beneath him. "Stay," they sang, "stay and know all. Stay, and the sea will still its hunger." The melody softened then, no longer calling, but comforting, as though the waves themselves had joined in. He felt his heart slowing, his breath easing. He could almost believe that the world was ending gently in beauty. But deep within that peace, something stirred. A small, clear voice, not of the Sirens, but of memory. It spoke in the rhythm of Penelope's loom, in the laughter of his son as a child, in the creak of the oar, the hum of the sail, the heartbeat of the ship beneath his feet. It said simply, "Remember why you began." He drew a long breath, his chest tight, his vision swimming. The ropes held him upright as the song rippled through him, not gone, but now passing through instead of taking root. The ship moved on. The voices thinned, stretching behind them like mist torn by wind. The music softened, became faint, then was gone. Silence returned. The world breathed again. The air felt lighter, the waves brighter. Odysseus sagged against the mast, trembling, his throat dry as sand. His men turned, seeing his tears, and hurried to unbind him. "Are you hurt, Captain?" Eurylochus asked, pulling away the last knot. Odysseus shook his head slowly. "No, only awakened." He looked toward the receding rocks, now nothing but dark shapes against the endless sea. "They sang truly," he murmured. "They promised peace. But peace without striving is only sleep." The men removed the wax from their ears, blinking as the sound of the world returned, the creak of wood, the rush of water, the sigh of wind. They smiled, hearing once more the living sea. Odysseus walked to the prow, his legs weak but steady. The horizon stretched before them, wide and unbroken. The air smelled of rain and sun, and a flock of white birds crossed overhead, their wings catching light. He watched them until they vanished into the sky, and his heart, though weary, felt clear. "Curiosity brought us here," he said quietly. "Discipline carried us through. And remembrance will bring us home." The men nodded, not needing to understand every word. The sea itself seemed to echo in agreement, its rhythm gentle, endless, forgiving. That night, they anchored in calm water beneath a sky heavy with stars. The men slept easily, their faces peaceful in the lamplight. Only Odysseus remained awake. He sat by the mast that had held him and traced with his fingers the grooves where the ropes had bitten. They were marks of survival, yes, but also of surrender and of wisdom. He gazed at the stars and thought of the Sirens' song. It had not been false. It had shown him beauty, too much of it perhaps. But in that beauty was a truth, that every mortal heart longs to rest, even as it beats toward more living. To resist the song was not to deny beauty, but to choose motion over stillness, striving over slumber. He smiled faintly. The night air touched his face like breath. "Thank you," he whispered to the darkness, not to the sirens, not to the gods, but to the part of himself that had remembered. When dawn came, it rose quiet and golden. The men stirred, stretching, their laughter light again. Odysseus greeted them with calm joy. "We've passed through another kind of storm," he said. Eurylochus chuckled. "A quieter one, but no less strong." "Perhaps the quiet storms are the ones that teach best," Odysseus said. He took the tiller, feeling the smooth grain of the wood under his hand. The sea ahead glimmered like polished glass, and far in the distance, faint clouds marked the next horizon. Somewhere beyond them he knew more trials waited, but so did more lessons, more beauty, and more of life's unending music. The ship moved forward, gentle as a breath, carrying men who had heard the song of their own hearts and chosen at last to keep sailing. After the sirens' voices faded, the sea lay open and wide again, pure as new glass. The men rowed lightly, grateful to hear nothing but the splash of oars and the soft answering sigh of water. Their ears rang faintly with silence, a silence that felt earned. Even the air seemed clean, washed free of illusions. But Circe's map was not yet complete. Odysseus remembered her voice, calm, measured, kind, but edged with warning. Past the Sirens' shore lie two fates that live side by side, Scylla, the devourer, and Charybdis, the destroyer. You cannot avoid both. Choose the narrower danger, and trust the oar. He had not spoken of this to the crew. They deserved rest before fear returned. Yet as the wind began to shift, he felt the sea change again, a heaviness beneath the keel, a pulse deep and rhythmic, as though the ocean itself had begun to breathe with purpose. Toward evening, the light took on a strange hue, not gold or rose, but pale, like fire seen through water. Clouds hung close to the surface of the sea, their edges the colour of steel. The air smelled faintly of iron and rain. Odysseus steered by instinct now. The waters narrowed, hemmed in by cliffs that rose black and high on either side. The sound of surf came from far ahead, not the soft break of ordinary waves, but something deeper, circular, turning upon itself. He called his men close. "Friends," he said, voice steady, "we come now to a strait where the sea holds two hearts. One beats in hunger, one in fury. On our right lies Charybdis, who swallows the tide and the sky alike. On our left, Scylla, who waits in her cave for those who drift too near. We will pass between them, and we will pass alive." The men's faces grew pale, but they nodded. Fear, when named gently, becomes smaller. Eurylochus asked, "Which side do we favour?" Odysseus met his gaze. "The lesser grief. Better to lose what the sea demands than to lose ourselves." He took up his bow then, not to strike, but to steady his own resolve. He wrapped his cloak around his shoulders and took his place at the prow. "Row, as you have never rowed before," he said quietly. "But do not look aside. Let me do the seeing." The ship entered the narrow way. The cliffs leaned close, their faces wet and glistening, streaked with green moss that shone faintly in the dim light. Wind funneled between them, low and moaning, as if the rocks themselves warned of what lived there. To the right, the sea churned, not from wind, but from something vast and unseen below. It turned slow at first, a spiral the width of a field, the surface lowering as though drawn by invisible hands. The air above it shimmered, trembling with heat and cold at once. Even the clouds seemed to hesitate before crossing that space. The men felt the pull, subtle at first, then growing. The oars bit harder into the water, fighting to hold course. "Steady," Odysseus murmured. "Do not yield to what calls you down." They rowed on, muscles straining, eyes forward. To look into Charybdis was to risk memory. She was not a whirlpool alone, but the hunger that lives in all things. She whispered of endings, quiet ones, simple ones, ones that seemed almost merciful. Odysseus felt the tug in his chest and countered it with breath. "Not yet," he told himself. "There is still light to be learned." Then, from the left cliff, came another sound, sharper, nearer, the scrape of stone against stone. A cry, half wind, half voice, echoed through the narrow gorge. The men flinched. Scylla had awakened. Odysseus did not look at first. He kept his eyes on the path ahead, counting the beats of the oars. 1, 2, 3. Then the shadow fell over the deck. He looked up. She was not a shape the world could measure. Part woman, part serpent, part storm. 6 long necks arched from the cavern's mouth, each crowned with a face pale and fierce, eyes bright as lightning through cloud. Her cries were many, her hunger ancient. She did not roar. She sang in a low, shivering tone. The voice of fear itself made music. For a moment, even Odysseus felt small, not in weakness, but in understanding. Some forces are beyond conquest. They are to be survived, not mastered. "Row," he whispered. "Row through." The men obeyed, pulling with the rhythm of desperation and faith. The ship creaked, the oars bent, the air thickened. The wind from Charybdis's vortex sucked at their stern. The cliff pressed close enough to brush the tips of the oars on the port side. Then Scylla struck. A flash of motion, the whip of necks, the scream of splintering wood, a sudden emptiness where men had been. Odysseus did not turn, though the sound of his crew's cries tore through him like rain through leaves. He gripped the mast, eyes fixed on the narrowing path of open water. "Keep the course," he called, his voice shaking but strong. "They are with us still, in courage if not in flesh. Keep the course." And somehow they did. The ship slipped beyond the cliffs, out into open sea once more. The roar behind them faded to a dull thunder. The air cleared. The water calmed. The men's arms fell limp at their sides, their breaths coming hard. They counted, and found that 6 were gone. None spoke the number aloud. Odysseus bowed his head. "The sea takes what it must," he said quietly. "We sail for their memory now." For a long time they drifted without speaking. The sky was pale again, streaked with soft light. The cliffs behind them looked almost peaceful, their terrible secrets hidden beneath the calm. The wind turned gentle, brushing their faces as if in apology. Odysseus looked into the water and saw only his reflection, lined, weary, alive. He touched the surface with his fingertips, breaking it, watching it heal again. The sea, he thought, was both wound and healer, and life, for all its peril, was the same. Eurylochus came to sit beside him. "You chose right," he said quietly. "We are fewer, but still we are." Odysseus nodded. "No choice feels right when it costs lives. But the gods measure hearts, not victories." The wind filled the sail. The ship moved forward once more, slower, humbler. The men began to sing, not loudly but low, a wordless hum that bound them together. Their song drifted across the surface of the water, blending with the hush of the waves. They were sailors again, neither heroes nor victims, only men, alive, learning to live between dangers. That night, as the stars returned, the air smelled faintly of wild herbs again. The stormlight was gone, the sea was wide and clear. Odysseus sat by the tiller, hands resting lightly on the worn wood. He thought of Circe, her calm voice, her warning that some dangers must be faced, not fought. He understood now. Scylla and Charybdis were not only monsters of the deep, but mirrors of human fear. One the dread of loss, the other the dread of nothingness. Between them lay the narrow way of living, the way that asks for courage without arrogance, endurance without denial. The stars seemed nearer that night. The constellations shimmered like small promises. The sea breathed evenly beneath the hull. No longer enemy, no longer test, just presence. He looked at his men, sleeping, and whispered, "Rest. We are still here." The wind shifted gently eastward, as if agreeing. By dawn, the cliffs were only a shadow behind them, and the world ahead opened once more into possibility. Odysseus felt the faint stirring of hope, not the wild, bright kind of youth, but the steady, enduring kind that grows from pain understood. He knew there would be more storms, more choices that would weigh like stones. But the sea no longer seemed endless in its cruelty. It was vast, yes, but it listened. He steered toward the sunrise, and for a moment it seemed as if the water itself glowed from within, a soft golden pulse that kept time with the beating of his heart. The sea after Scylla and Charybdis was mercifully calm. It seemed ashamed of its own violence, smoothing itself in long glassy stretches as if to soothe the men it had frightened. The oars dipped lightly. The sail hung slack at times, heavy with dew. The air smelled of salt and faint blossoms carried from far islands they could not see. Odysseus's crew had grown quiet again. They rowed with a kind of reverence now, each stroke deliberate. The memory of the 6 who had vanished into the cliffs was still with them. Not a wound exactly, but a tenderness that lived behind the ribs. "Captain," said Eurylochus one afternoon, How far until home? Odysseus smiled sadly. Far enough to keep us humble, near enough to keep us faithful. He turned his eyes to the west, where the horizon glowed faintly gold. That line of light had become his compass, the promise that kept his heart aligned when all else wavered. But promise alone cannot feed men, and soon hunger began to press again, soft at first, then sharper. Their stores had dwindled, a few handfuls of grain, a skin of wine, some dried fish. The sea offered no gifts. The nets came up empty, the hooks bare. Even the gulls had flown elsewhere. It was on the 7th evening that they saw land, green and wide, its hills shining in the sunset like polished bronze. From its centre rose a gentle smoke, and the air around it shimmered with warmth. It looked peaceful, almost divine. Odysseus felt both relief and unease. "This," he said quietly, "is Thrinacia, the island of Helios, the sun god. His herds graze here, pure and deathless. Circe warned us, we must not touch them, no matter our need." The men listened, weary and hollow-eyed. "A night's rest only," he said. "We'll fill our water jars and sail at dawn." They nodded, but he saw the shadow of doubt in their faces, the kind born not of disobedience, but of exhaustion. Hunger is a slow persuasion. It does not argue, it whispers. They beached the ship on a quiet shore, where the sand glowed faintly with warmth from the setting sun. The water there was clear and still. The air smelled of grass and honey. As the light faded, they built a small fire and shared what food remained. Thin and meagre, but enough for one more night. The sea murmured gently nearby. A breeze moved through the tall grass, carrying with it the faint sound of bells. At first, the men thought it was the wind itself. Then they looked toward the meadow beyond the dunes and froze. There, moving slowly in the fading light, were the herds of Helios. Hundreds of cattle, white as clouds, their hides glowing faintly as if lit from within. Their horns gleamed like silver crescents, and the ground where they walked seemed to bloom. They grazed peacefully, heads lowered, tails swishing in rhythm, creatures untouched by time. No mortal herd had ever looked so beautiful. Their breath rose in golden mist. Their eyes reflected the setting sun. "By the gods!" whispered one of the sailors. "To look upon them is blessing enough." Odysseus stepped between them and the sight. "Then let the blessing end at sight. Touch nothing here. The sun watches his flock as keenly as a mother her child. To harm one is to invite ruin." The men bowed their heads. "We understand." But later that night, as Odysseus slept, the wind began to whisper again. Not the soft voice of sea breeze, but something older, hungrier. The smell of roasted grain, of sweetness, drifted through their dreams. And in that dream hunger, they saw home, tables full, lamps burning, laughter rising from hearths. Eurylochus sat awake long after the others had fallen into uneasy sleep. He watched the stars reflected in the calm water, each trembling like a candle's flame. "We have followed him through every peril," he murmured to himself. "But a man cannot row forever on faith alone." Morning came bright and still. The sun rose huge and golden over the island, bathing everything in warmth. The cattle moved through the fields, their shadows long and graceful. The men gathered driftwood, fetched water, mended sails, quiet, dutiful. Yet Odysseus saw how their eyes followed the herds. He approached Eurylochus, speaking low. "You are my brother in heart. help me guard them from folly." Eurylochus nodded, though his voice was weary. "Captain, hunger makes wise men foolish. The gods forgive those who starve. Surely the sun, who warms all things, will forgive a bite of his bounty." Odysseus's gaze hardened slightly. "The gods forgive ignorance, not arrogance. We will eat our bread and wait for the wind to turn." But the wind did not turn. For a week it held steady against them, always blowing from the west, always denying escape. Their food ran out. They chewed grass, then leather, then nothing. The sea remained calm, cruelly beautiful, as if watching. At night the men dreamed of banquets, of steaming bowls and tender meat. The dream smelled real enough to wake them, and each morning the hunger felt sharper. Odysseus prayed, poured wine into the waves, asked for mercy, but the gods were silent. Then, one afternoon while he slept apart on the beach, Eurylochus gathered the others. "Listen," he said, his voice low but urgent. "The captain's heart is noble, but his body does not feel what ours feels. Are we to die honouring beasts? Better to offend the sun for a moment than to perish forgotten." They hesitated, torn between loyalty and need. The wind whispered through the grass like breath urging them on. At last they rose. They chose the fattest of the herd and led it to the fire. As the blade fell, the earth trembled faintly, though no storm brewed. They roasted the meat and ate until their hunger fell quiet. They shared it with laughter that sounded too loud against the still air. But when the fire burned low, the laughter faded. The smell of the feast lingered, and above it came another scent, sharp, metallic, unmistakable, lightning. The sky darkened though the sun still shone. The cattle that remained lifted their heads and bellowed in unison, not in rage, but in sorrow. Their eyes burned with a golden light. Then they turned, walking calmly into the sea until the water closed over them. The waves hissed where they vanished. The men froze, fear rooting their feet. "What have we done?" whispered Eurylochus. Odysseus woke to thunder. He ran to the shore, saw the ashes, smelled the sin. His heart broke not in anger, but in pity. Pity for men too mortal to carry the weight of divine rules. He looked at their faces, pale and wet with regret, and said only, "We will pay what we owe." The sky grew black without warning. A single bolt struck the mast, splitting it like a reed. Fire and sea met in blinding light. The ship heaved, cracked, and was gone. The men were scattered into the water, their cries lost to the roar. Odysseus clung to a broken plank, eyes closed, breath thin. Rain lashed him, waves turned him end over end, yet through it all he heard the faint echo of Helios's voice, not cruel, only stern. "You were warned. The law of reverence must stand." When dawn came, the storm was gone. The sea was calm again, cruelly calm. Around him floated only silence. No ship, no men. Only the endless horizon, glimmering gold under the morning sun. He whispered each name of his crew to the wind, letting them drift away like small offerings. "Forgive them," he said to the waves. "They were hungry for life." For 9 days he drifted alone, the plank carrying him like a cradle. He drank rainwater, dreamed of voices, watched the clouds shape and reshape into faces he knew. The sun burned, then soothed, then burned again. Yet through all the loneliness, he felt something new. Not despair, but acceptance. He understood now what the prophet had meant. Peace will not wait at the door. It must be built, even when everything else has been lost. On the 10th dawn, land appeared. Distant, low, green at its edges. The wind at last had changed. He turned his face toward it and smiled weakly. That night, as he drifted nearer to safety, the stars glowed brighter than he had ever seen. They looked almost human in their watchfulness. He whispered to them, "You have seen all. Tell her, tell Penelope, I am coming, though the road grows long." The sea gave no answer, but its rhythm steadied, slow, constant, eternal. And in that steadying, he found comfort. The dead were gone, but their courage remained within him. The gods had not destroyed him. They had carved him thinner, truer, like driftwood shaped by the tide. He lay back upon the plank, eyes open to the night, and let the sea carry him wherever mercy waited. The sun rose pale that morning, as though unsure whether to bless or to bear witness. Odysseus floated alone upon the wide blue emptiness, his body weak, his lips cracked by salt. Around him stretched the quiet of a world cleansed by fury. The sea had spent its rage, now it slept. No ship, no companions, no echo of oars. Only the whisper of ripples against the fragment of mast that kept him from the depths. The water gleamed like a mirror, showing him a face he hardly recognized. Drawn, hollow-eyed, half a memory of the man who had once commanded fleets. He looked up at the sky, clear again, as if the storm had never been. "Why me?" he murmured to the light. But the light gave no answer, only warmth, indifferent and perfect. The gods, he thought, were not cruel. They simply did not explain. Hours passed, marked only by the slow drift of clouds. The sea swelled and fell, breathing beneath him. He felt its rhythm enter his own, rise, fall, until he could no longer tell where his heartbeat ended and the oceans began. He closed his eyes and listened. It was not silence he heard, but 1,000 small sounds folded into one. The hiss of water against wood, the faint crackle of salt drying on his skin, the distant cry of a seabird, life, in its simplest voice. He thought of his crew then, men of laughter and temper, loyalty and fault. They had followed him through years of war and wonder, through lands where gods walked unseen. Now they belonged to the sea, their names scattered like shells across its floor. He whispered each name once more, the way a priest might light a candle. "Eurylochus," he said softly, "you were right to question. You were wrong to yield, but all men bend before hunger." He spoke the others in turn, one by one, until his voice was gone. Then he let the wind take their memory and carry it onward. Toward midday, the horizon began to blur. A thin band of cloud gathered far away, not dark yet, but purposeful. He smelled rain, sharp and metallic. The sea, too, seemed to change its tone, a low hum beneath the surface like a distant drumbeat. Odysseus watched it without fear. He knew the signs. No sailor mistakes calm that comes too suddenly. "Another lesson," he whispered. The sea was a teacher that never retired. The clouds thickened, rolling upon one another, black and violet at their roots, brilliant white at their crowns. Thunder muttered, not loud but thoughtful, like the clearing of an ancient throat. The air pressed down, heavy with waiting. Zeus, lord of sky and law, was coming. When the first bolt struck, it tore the world in two. Light split the air. Sound followed a breath later, deep enough to shake the bones. The sea leapt upward, flung into mountains of water that rose and fell in wild procession. Odysseus clung to the plank, his arms burning, his eyes fixed on nothing but the next breath. Rain began, not drops, but sheets, cold as melted stone. It struck his skin like needles, but he did not cry out. There was no use for fear now. The storm was not an enemy, only a force. One does not fight the sea, one learns to move within its moods. Zeus, he called into the roar, if you mean to take me awake. The answer was wind. It tore the words from his mouth and scattered them into foam. Waves lifted him high, then dropped him deep into valleys of grey water where light could not follow. Each fall felt endless, each rise a rebirth. He lost track of time. The world was no longer measured in hours, but in heartbeats. Sometimes he saw lightning fork through the clouds, painting the rain silver. Sometimes he saw only the black dome of sky closing around him. And then, between strikes of light, he felt something shift inside him. Not in body, but in spirit. A small quietness that refused to drown. It was not strength, nor defiance. It was acceptance. He understood now what it meant to yield without breaking, to bend as reeds do in the wind, trusting that survival is not victory, but grace. The storm raged on. Thunder walked across the heavens, heavy and rhythmic. The rain softened, then returned, then softened again, as though the sky itself could not decide between anger and sorrow. Odysseus floated through it all, mind adrift, eyes half closed. Visions came to him, perhaps dreams, perhaps memories. Penelope, her hands weaving by lamplight. Telemachus, a boy chasing gulls along the cliffs. The olive tree in their courtyard, roots deep, leaves trembling under a summer breeze. He reached toward these images, not to possess them, but to remind himself that they had once been real. That even gods, for all their power, could not erase what had been truly lived. Lightning struck close again, blinding him. The plank shuddered. A wave tore it free of his grasp. He plunged beneath the surface, cold closing around him like glass. For an instant, there was no up, no down, only the vast, weightless silence of the deep. He opened his eyes underwater. Light rippled above him, distorted and distant. He kicked upward, but the sea pressed harder, as if holding him to its heart. Then, faintly, he saw another light, not lightning, but softer, golden. It seemed to drift toward him like a lantern through fog. He followed it without thinking, arms aching, lungs burning. The light grew larger, warmer, until it filled his vision completely. He broke the surface with a gasp. Rain fell still, but gentler now. The clouds had begun to thin, their edges torn by wind. The golden light was real, the sun itself fighting its way through the storm. He lay back, breathing hard, staring up at that stubborn glow. Zeus's anger had spent itself. What remained was mercy. By evening, the storm had wandered east. The sea quieted, still trembling from its own fury. Shattered branches and bits of wreckage floated by, evidence of other wanderers perhaps. Odysseus turned each over with his hand, searching for names, finding none. The sun dipped low, red and solemn. He floated toward it, drawn as all living things are to warmth. In that fading light, the sea looked newly born, its surface streaked with silver and rose. He spoke aloud, though no one could hear. "I am still here," he said softly. I do not know why, but I am. A small wave lifted him, carried him a little farther. He let it. He had learned that the will of the sea was not always against him. Night came clear, filled with stars. He could smell land, faint, earthy, edged with sweetness. The current moved in that direction, steady and patient. He did not fight it. As he drifted, he felt a deep calm spread through him. Not relief, not triumph, but belonging. He was part of this sea now, part of its endless story of loss and renewal. He closed his eyes, letting the water rock him like a cradle. Somewhere high above, Zeus's voice rolled faintly across the sky. Not thunder now, but a sigh, like wind through pine. You endure, son of Ithaca, it seemed to say, and endurance is the closest mortals come to immortality. Odysseus smiled through cracked lips. Then let that be enough, he whispered. He slept, the first true sleep in many days, while the sea bore him gently toward dawn. When light returned, it came softly, not with glare, but with glow. The air was warm again. He awoke to the sound of waves breaking somewhere near, rhythmic and kind. He turned his head and saw it. An island. Green cliffs rising from the sea, veiled in mist, touched by sunlight. Birds wheeled above it, their cries sharp and joyful. He felt sand beneath his fingers for the first time in weeks. He crawled onto the shore and lay there, breathing the scent of earth. The tide washed over his feet, cool and forgiving. For a long time, he did not move. He let the wind dry his skin, the warmth seep into his bones. He had come through fire, through monsters, through God's tempests. And still he lived. At last, he whispered to the sky, "Thank you, not for saving me, but for letting me see." The clouds parted and sunlight touched his face in answer. He slept again, this time on solid ground. His dreams filled not with terror but with soft things. Leaves stirring, voices laughing, the sound of a loom's gentle rhythm. And somewhere beyond that dream, a new chapter of his wandering waited, one of shelter and illusion, of kindness that tempted the soul to stay. But that was for another dawn. For now the storm had passed, and the sea at last was silent. When Odysseus awoke, the world had changed its voice. The sea no longer roared or whispered. It sighed endlessly, softly, as though content at last. The air was warm and fragrant. The sand beneath his hands was fine and cool, glittering like powdered shells. A shadow moved across his face, and he opened his eyes to find a canopy of vines heavy with blossoms the colour of dawn. The scent was unlike anything he had known. Jasmine, myrtle, honey, salt. He sat up slowly, blinking. Around him spread a forest so green it seemed to breathe, the leaves trembling with light. Birds flitted through the branches, their songs layered like threads of gold. A brook wound through the grove, its water clear and musical, flowing over stones worn smooth as pearls. He listened for the sea. It was there, beyond the trees, a distant shimmer of silver and blue. But here, in this place, its sound was gentle, not commanding. He had washed ashore upon the island of Ogygia, though he did not yet know its name. For a long time he lay still, letting warmth return to his limbs. The storm had left him bruised and hollow, but alive. He felt as though he had drifted out of time itself, into a corner of the world untouched by grief or labour. When he rose, his clothes clung heavy with salt. He tore a piece of bark to drink the fresh water that trickled down the rocks. Then he followed the stream inland, hoping for shelter or at least a fire's spark. The path wound upward through flowering thickets. The air shimmered slightly, as if sunlight had taken visible form. Then the trees opened, and before him lay a meadow bathed in golden light. At its centre stood a dwelling built not by mortal hands, its walls smooth as coral, its roof a lattice of woven cedar and vine. The scent of bread and herbs drifted through the air, carried by the sea breeze. And there she was, Calypso. She sat beside the hearth, weaving upon a loom of silver thread. Her hair fell long and dark over her shoulders. Her eyes, when she lifted them, held the calm of deep water. Around her feet slept small animals, doves, a fawn, a white fox, all at ease. When she saw the stranger at her door, she smiled, not in surprise, but as though she had expected him. "Welcome, traveller," she said, her voice soft and resonant, like waves folding upon sand. "The sea brings me gifts when it wishes. You are one of them." Odysseus bowed his head slightly. "I am no gift, lady. Only a man who has lost everything but his name." She rose and crossed the threshold toward him. Her presence carried warmth, not heat, a steady radiance that made the air hum faintly. "Then keep your name," she said. "I ask for nothing else." She led him inside, where the air smelled of cedar smoke and rosemary. A table stood laden with fruits, fresh bread and wine that gleamed pale as amber. "Eat," she said. "Drink. Rest." He hesitated. "You know who I am?" Her smile deepened, touched with something like sadness. "Odysseus of Ithaca. The sea speaks of you often. It carries your story in its sleep." He sighed. "Then it carries too much grief." "Grief is what makes the waves sing," she said. "Without it, the world would be silent." He stayed the night, and one night became 2, then 3. His wounds healed. His strength returned. Calypso cared for him without question, her manner neither possessive nor distant, simply present, as though she had lived too long to fear solitude. Her island was a paradise. Morning came with slow light, filtered through vines. Noon shimmered upon the sea. Evening brought a sky thick with stars so bright they cast shadows upon the sand. Flowers opened and closed with the rhythm of breath. The fruit never spoiled. The air never tired. And yet, beneath its perfection, Odysseus felt an unease he could not name. Days passed, and he realized he had begun to lose measure of them. Time on Ogygia moved like the tide, forward and back, without end. The moon waxed, but did not wane. His heart began to blur at its edges. Calypso noticed. One afternoon, as they sat beside the stream, she said, "You dream of elsewhere." He looked into the water, watching the ripples scatter his reflection. "I dream of return, of a woman weaving by lamplight, of a boy grown taller than his father remembers." Her eyes softened. "You think the world beyond this one still waits unchanged?" "I must believe it does," he said. "If not, then all my wandering is only running." She was silent for a while, then asked, "Do you find this place cruel?" "No," he said. "It is too kind. That is what makes it dangerous." She smiled faintly. "You speak as one who has seen the cost of peace." "Peace without passage," he replied, "is only sleep." Calypso turned her gaze toward the horizon. "You think me your captor?" Yet I offer you no chain, no spell. You are free to leave when the sea allows. He followed her eyes to the ocean, where waves lapped quietly against the shore. And when will that be? She did not answer. The question was not hers to decide. Seasons, if they existed here, passed unnoticed. The world remained always lush, always fragrant, always warm. Sometimes Odysseus would walk along the cliffs, tracing the patterns of light upon the water, trying to mark the days by the colour of the sky. But the sky was always perfect. At night, he would sit beside Calypso's fire, listening as she spoke of the first mornings of the world, of how the sun was once a boy who learned to rise, how the stars were seeds flung into darkness. Her voice soothed him, yet each story left him lonelier. She belonged to beginnings. He belonged to endings. He found himself standing often at the shore, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sea looked harmless now, a mirror too calm to trust. "Why will it not move for me?" he whispered once. Calypso heard him. "Because you still carry its storm inside you," she said. "When you learn to quiet it, it will release you." One evening he dreamed. He stood upon the cliffs of Ithaca, and Penelope walked toward him through the olive trees, her face calm but her eyes full of questions. "Why do you linger, husband?" she asked. "The bed we built waits still." He tried to answer, but the sea rose between them, gentle but impassable. From its surface came Calypso's voice. "You could stay. Here, no time will steal what you love." Penelope's image wavered, like light on water. "Or go," she said, "and be mortal once more." He woke with his heart aching, his choice clearer than ever. At dawn, he found Calypso upon the beach, her hair streaming in the wind, her gaze distant. She turned before he spoke. "You are leaving," she said simply. He bowed his head. "If the gods permit." "They do." Her voice was calm, but her eyes shimmered like the sea before rain. "Hermes came to me in the night, the messenger with feet of flame. Zeus commands that I let you go." Odysseus felt both relief and sorrow. "Do you hate them for it?" "I am immortal," she said softly. "But I have learned to envy those who can end." He stepped closer. "You have given me kindness beyond measure." "And you," she said, "have given me the memory of company." She gestured toward the grove, where a new-built raft rested among the trees. Its timbers gleamed smooth, its ropes freshly woven from vines. "I shaped this for you. The wind will favor you until you reach open waters." He touched the wood, tracing the grain with gratitude. "How can I repay you?" She smiled. "By remembering that rest is not surrender. Even heroes must sometimes be still." He wanted to speak, to comfort her, to thank her again, but words fell away. Instead, he took her hand briefly, as one touches a blessing, and then turned to the sea. The raft rocked gently as he stepped aboard. Calypso stood upon the sand, the wind lifting her hair. "The world will wound you again," she said, "but it will also forgive." He nodded. "Both are worth the journey." As the tide drew him outward, the island shimmered in morning light, its cliffs golden, its forests aglow, its beauty undiminished. Yet already it seemed to fade, as though it were not a place but a long, kind dream. Odysseus watched until it was a smudge of green upon the horizon, then only light upon water. He felt neither triumph nor regret, only stillness. The island had taught him something even storms could not, that rest is sacred only when it ends. The sea swelled beneath his raft, carrying him forward. The air smelled once more of salt and change. Above him, the gulls cried, living voices, sharp and clear. He smiled, lifting his face to the wind. "Take me where memory waits," he said. And the sea, as if hearing a friend, answered with a single gentle wave that nudged him onward, toward fate, toward home, toward the endless, forgiving horizon. The wind that left Calypso's island was kind. It lifted the raft with a patient hand, smoothing the waves beneath it, carrying Odysseus without hurry. The sea was bright but not fierce, the air light as breath. He felt as though the world itself had chosen to rest a little before finishing his long story. He steered by the sun in the day, and the Pleiades by night. The sail was a square of woven vine and cloth, pale gold in the light. The mast creaked like an old friend, whispering encouragement. He had only the sea for company, yet the silence was no longer heavy. It had learned, as he had, to be gentle. He ate little, fruit dried by Calypso's hearth, drops of rain caught in his hands. Sleep came in short, deep spells. When he woke, the stars were his only witnesses. He had not seen them this clearly since boyhood. They seemed closer now, less like distant gods and more like quiet companions. Days passed. The sea changed its colour each morning, sapphire, then turquoise, then silver under clouds. His heart, once restless, moved in rhythm with the waves. He no longer counted the distance home. Home would appear when it chose to. All he could do was remain steady. On the 17th morning, the sky darkened again. He did not curse it. Storms were no longer enemies, only weather. He secured the ropes and waited. The wind rose, howled, shifted. The raft shuddered. Lightning flared across the clouds, and the sea lifted like a living thing. Poseidon had returned. The god of the deep, still angry for his son's blinded eye, rose in the form of a storm so vast it filled the horizon. His voice was thunder, his fury the heaving of the tides. "Mortal!" the wind seemed to shout. "You will not reach your shore unjudged." Odysseus gripped the mast and shouted into the gale, "I have paid for my pride, Lord of the sea. Let this be enough." The wind roared louder, as if in answer, and struck. The raft cracked in two. The mast splintered. The sea swallowed him whole. He sank through layers of grey light and bubbles. The world roared around him, but within the roar came another sound, soft and familiar, like the memory of a harp. Through the depths drifted a figure, cloaked in foam and light. Ino, the sea spirit once mortal, whose pity was older than wrath. She spoke without words, her voice inside his mind. "Endure once more, Ithacan. The sea remembers mercy too." From her hand she offered a veil, white as moonlight. "Wrap this around your chest. It will carry you until the land receives you. Then cast it back to the sea without regret." He took it, tied it close, and kicked upward. The surface broke above him in shards of light. He gasped air, clean, cold, saving. The storm still raged, but he floated now, lighter than fear. For 2 days he drifted, waves rising, waves falling, until at last, as dawn broke clear once more, he saw land. Not the wild cliffs of danger, but a green curve of earth, ringed by soft beaches and crowned with trees. The air carried the scent of life, soil, flowers, sweet water. He wept without shame. The surf threw him upon the shore like a gift. He lay there, trembling, salt in his hair, sand in his mouth, breathing as if for the first time. When he could move, He untied the veil and tossed it back into the tide. The waves caught it and drew it under, as though hands unseen received it gratefully. He staggered inland until he found a stand of reeds beside a stream. There he fell again, not from weakness, but from peace too sudden to bear. He slept, and the sea kept guard at his back. He woke at twilight to the sound of laughter. Soft, musical, human. For a moment he thought he was dreaming again, but then he heard footsteps through the grass, the splash of water, the rustle of cloth. Through the reeds came a group of young women, arms filled with linen, their laughter rising like the song of birds. They were washing garments in the stream, tossing them into the air so that drops of water flashed in the fading light. Among them walked one whose bearing set her apart. Tall, graceful, her eyes bright with purpose. She saw the stranger first. He was crouched among the reeds, more shadow than man, yet the air around him carried the dignity of something once royal. She did not scream. Instead, she stepped closer, cautious but unafraid. "Stranger," she said gently, "this is the land of the Phaeacians. You need not hide." Her voice was kind. It broke the long silence of exile in his heart. He rose slowly, covering himself with a branch torn from the reeds. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but steady. "I am a man adrift between worlds. If you are mortal, grant me a drop of water and a word of peace." She smiled, not in pity but in understanding. "You shall have both. My father is Alcinous, king of this island. Come, you will find no enemy here." Her name, she told him, was Nausicaa. Under her guidance, he was led to the city, a place of quiet wonder. The streets shone like pearl under lamplight. The air smelled of cedar and rain. The people of Phaeacia moved with grace, neither hurried nor idle. They greeted him with courtesy, not curiosity. At the palace, King Alcinous and Queen Arete welcomed him as one might welcome an old friend long delayed. "The sea sends us many strangers," said the queen. "Few carry such eyes as yours, eyes that have seen the world and still wish to see more." They seated him beside the hearth, placed warm bread and honey before him, and let him eat in silence until his hunger gentled. Then the king spoke. "You wear the look of one who has outrun death many times. Tell us your name, if it pleases you." Odysseus hesitated, for names carry weight. Then he lifted his head and said simply, "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, once king of Ithaca. I have wandered far." The hall fell silent. Then the king smiled. "We have heard your story from the bards, though not its ending. Rest here, and let us fill that missing piece." For many days he stayed among them. The Phaeacians were masters of ships and song. Their vessels glided across the sea faster than thought. Each evening, at Alcinous's bidding, the musicians played, flutes, lyres, and voices woven together so softly that even the sea seemed to pause to listen. They asked him for his tale, and he told it, not in boast, but as confession. He spoke of Troy and its towers of fire, of the Cyclops and Circe, of the Sirens, of his men, of his heart. The listeners wept quietly, not for his suffering, but for the endurance of the human soul. When he finished, the queen placed a hand over his. "No man should live forever between storms. Tomorrow, our ships will bear you home." He bowed his head, unable to speak. That night, he walked alone through the harbour, watching the vessels shift on their moorings. The moon floated high, painting the water silver. He thought of how many times he had seen this same moon from other shores. A constant face above an ever-changing world. Perhaps this, he whispered, is what the gods envy, that mortals can be lost and found again. A wind stirred, soft and cool, like approval. Dawn arrived clear and gentle. The Phaeacian sailors prepared a sleek black ship, its prow carved like a swan, its decks fragrant with new wood. They loaded it with food and wine, fresh linens and a chest of gifts, gold, bronze and fine cloth. Nausicaa came to him before he boarded. "You will not remember me long," she said with a smile, "but I will remember that once the sea gave me a hero washed ashore." He bowed to her. "If songs are ever sung of this journey, your kindness will be among them." She blushed, laughed softly, and stepped back as the sailors cast off. The oars dipped as one. The ship glided forward, smooth and swift. The harbour receded, the cliffs rose, and the island of the Phaeacians became a glow upon the horizon, a dream of rest granted between trials. Odysseus lay down upon soft linen at the stern. The sailors sang quietly, a song of homecoming and stars. The rhythm of their voices mingled with the rhythm of the waves until they were one. Sleep came upon him like mercy. The sea rocked him gently. The wind held steady, carrying the ship across the waters that would, at last, deliver him to the shores of Ithaca. He dreamed of olive trees and a woman's voice calling his name. He dreamed of a hearth still burning, a son grown tall, a dog waiting by the gate. The dreams were light, fragile, beautiful, the kind that vanish at dawn but leave their warmth behind. The ship sailed on through the starlit night, swift as thought, silent as forgiveness. The sailors watched over him with reverence, for they knew they carried not merely a man, but a story, one that belonged to every heart that had ever wandered and hoped to return. The wind that had carried Odysseus home at last grew still before dawn. The black ship of the Phaeacians glided silently toward a familiar shore, its oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm, not to wake the sleeper, but to honour him. The stars above were paling when the prow touched sand. The sailors lifted Odysseus gently from where he lay. He did not stir. He slept the deep sleep of one who has finally been forgiven by the sea. They placed him on the beach, under the shadow of an olive tree. Beside him, they set the chest of gifts from King Alcinous, gold, fine cloth, bronze, and wine. Then, with silent reverence, they turned their ship and vanished into the silver horizon before dawn could find them. When Odysseus awoke, he felt earth beneath his hand. Not sand, not driftwood, earth, solid and fragrant, warm with the scent of grass and salt. He sat up slowly, his heart hammering. The air smelled different here, sharper, drier, alive with the cry of gulls he had known since boyhood. The cliffs, the curved shore, the small stream winding through reeds, all were as he had remembered them. He was home. For a long while he did not move. He touched the soil as though afraid it might vanish, scooping a handful and letting it fall through his fingers. He pressed his forehead against it, whispering thanks to the gods who had tested and spared him. Every grain of that earth seemed a word of welcome, and yet even joy carried caution. Ithaca was his still, but the years had not stood still for Ithaca. His name might be legend, or rumour, or forgotten entirely. The suitors who sought his wife's hand could rule the halls he built. His son, the boy he had left behind, might no longer remember the face of his father. He rose, gathering his cloak around him, and walked inland. The path climbed through scrub and olive groves, the leaves silver in the morning wind. Birds darted between branches, and goats grazed upon the slopes. It was a living memory, changed yet known. He came to a spring, shaded by stone and fig trees. The water spilled into a pool where flowers grew wild, iris, thyme, and mint. There he paused to drink, kneeling as he had done in younger days. The water tasted of home, cold, mineral, pure. When he looked up, a stranger stood before him. The man was tall and weathered, his cloak patched, his staff smooth with years of walking. He regarded Odysseus with eyes both curious and kind. "Traveller," he said, "you look as though the sea has carried you farther than most men dream to go." Odysseus studied him. The lean strength of his arms, the calm in his voice. There was something of wisdom about him, and something else beneath the surface. Mischief, perhaps. "Indeed," Odysseus said carefully, "and I have washed ashore on an island I do not know." The stranger smiled. "Do you not? Few forget the shape of Ithaca once they have seen it." Odysseus's heart quickened, but he feigned ignorance. "Then I am blessed by accident." "Accidents," the man said softly, "are only the disguises of fate." At that, the light around him seemed to shift. The air shimmered faintly. The scent of olive and air thickened. When Odysseus blinked, the man was gone. In his place stood a figure radiant and timeless, grey-eyed Athena, her armour shining with the calm light of dawn. "Wise son of Laertes," she said, "even now your caution keeps you safe. The gods have not forgotten you." He bowed deeply, overcome. "Lady of wisdom," he whispered, "you have guided me through war, through storm, through shadow. What remains for me to face?" "Your greatest test," she said, "is not battle, but restraint. You return to a home overtaken by prideful men. They eat your bread and court your wife, mocking the hope of your return. To strike too soon is to fail. You must move unseen until the moment is ripe." Odysseus straightened. "Then teach me patience once more." Athena smiled, proud, almost tender. "I shall cloak you in the form of a beggar. The world looks away from those who seem small, and thus they see everything." She touched his brow. The air thickened, shimmered again. His skin grew rough, his clothes coarse and torn. His hair turned grey, his shoulders stooped. When he looked into the water's surface, a weary old man stared back. "Go first to the swineherd Eumaeus," said Athena. "He has remained loyal through all these years. Tell him nothing yet of who you are. Test the hearts of men before you reveal your own." Then she was gone. A gust of wind through the leaves, a glimmer of light upon the path. Odysseus walked on. The sun climbed higher, pouring gold across the hills. From the distance came the smell of smoke and the faint bleating of pigs. He followed it through the trees until he reached a small hut built of stone and woven branches. The fence was sturdy, the yard swept clean. Dogs barked, then fell silent as an old man stepped from the doorway, a wooden cup in his hand. Eumaeus. He was older now, his beard greyer, his frame more bent. Yet his eyes still carried the steady kindness of the servant who had once carried Telemachus upon his shoulder. When he saw the stranger, he frowned, not in suspicion, but in sympathy. "Who are you, traveller, that you come to a poor man's door?" Odysseus bowed low. "A wanderer of many storms, seeking shelter and a crust of bread." Eumaeus opened the gate at once. Then come and share what little I have. The gods favour those who show mercy to strangers. Inside, the hut was humble but warm. The smell of smoke and cooked meat filled the air. A small fire burned, and above it hung a pot of stew. Eumaeus motioned for him to sit, ladled broth into a bowl, and placed it before him. "Eat, old one," he said kindly. "I too have known hunger." Odysseus ate in silence, the simple food tasting better than any feast he had known. When he finished, he said, "Your heart is generous. May your master reward you well." Eumaeus sighed. "My master. He had been gone these 20 years. Some say he is dead, others that he wanders still. But I believe, no, I know, he will return. Odysseus was a good man, and good men are not forgotten by the gods." Odysseus looked at him, his throat tight. "You speak as one who loved him." Eumaeus smiled sadly. "He treated me as a brother. I will serve none other until I see his body or his face again." Odysseus's eyes stung, but he hid it beneath a nod. "Then hope yet lives on this island." Eumaeus placed a hand upon his shoulder. "Hope is all that keeps us men from turning to stone." Night came softly. The fire burned low. Outside, the stars gathered over the quiet hills. Odysseus lay upon a bed of straw, the warmth of the hearth at his back. He listened to the sounds of the swineherd moving about, the rustle of hay, the soft humming of an old song. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not to be home, not yet, but to be among hearts that still remembered kindness. In the silence that followed, he thought of Penelope, her patience, her strength. He wondered if she still sat by the loom, weaving and unweaving, guarding hope as if it were flame. He wondered if his son had become the man he had dreamed of. And somewhere beyond those thoughts, beyond the low hum of the fire, he felt Athena's unseen presence, watchful, waiting. The next dawn would bring new steps, new disguises, new truths revealed. For now, the night wrapped him in its quiet embrace. The long journey had not yet ended, but the path home had begun to take shape beneath his feet. The olive leaves rustled softly outside, whispering to the sea below. He has returned. The morning light that touched the hills of Ithaca was gentle. It did not blaze. It crept quietly, as though unwilling to startle the earth from its sleep. Dew glimmered on the grass. The olive trees swayed with the faintest sigh of wind. Old witnesses whispering to one another that something long awaited was at last beginning. Inside the small hut, Odysseus stirred. He had slept little. Dreams had tugged at him, of firelight flickering across stone walls, of footsteps in his own hall, of Penelope's face half seen in shadow. He woke with the strange ache that lives between fear and hope. Eumaeus, the swineherd, was already at the fire. He turned as the old beggar rose. "You look troubled, friend." "Bad dreams?" Odysseus smiled faintly. "Dreams are only memories that still wish to be heard." Eumaeus nodded, understanding more than he asked. He handed him a crust of bread. "Eat, and may this day treat you kindly." Before Odysseus could answer, the sound of footsteps approached from outside, light, quick, young. The dogs barked, then quieted with joyful whines. The door opened, and a young man stepped into the hut. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face clear and serious. His eyes, sharp as polished bronze, searched the stranger's face with curiosity. Eumaeus's voice broke into joy. "Telemachus! By the gods, it's you!" The young man smiled and clasped the old swineherd's shoulders. "You've kept your promise, old friend. The herds thrive, and the house still has loyal hearts." Then his gaze fell again on the beggar. "And who is this guest you shelter?" Odysseus looked up slowly. Their eyes met, father and son, each searching the other's face, each seeing something hauntingly familiar. For a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Eumaeus began to speak, but Athena, unseen, moved through the air like a wind over leaves. She touched the beggar's face, and in the blink of an eye his form changed. The grey hair darkened, the shoulders straightened, the eyes burned bright with recognition. Telemachus staggered back, breath caught in his throat. "Father!" Odysseus's voice trembled, though it was steady still. "My son!" They reached for each other at once, not as kings or heirs, but as men who had both waited too long. Their embrace was fierce, wordless. The hut seemed to glow with the warmth of it. When they parted, tears shone in both their eyes. "I thought you were a story," Telemachus whispered, "a tale my mother told to keep faith alive." "And I thought you were still a child chasing gulls by the sea," Odysseus said. "Now I find a man before me." They sat together by the fire, and Odysseus told him all, not as boast, but as confession. The islands, the gods, the storms, the long ache of survival. Telemachus listened in silence, his hands clasped. When his father finished, he said quietly, "Then the gods have not abandoned us, only delayed their mercy." Odysseus smiled. "Mercy arrives when we have learned enough to receive it." As they spoke, Eumaeus kept watch outside. When the sun climbed high, he returned, worry etched on his brow. "The suitors grow bolder," he said. "They fill your halls each day, drinking your wine, slaughtering your cattle. They boast that the queen will choose among them before the next moon." A shadow crossed Telemachus's face. She weaves and unweaves still, waiting for a sign. Odysseus stood, his expression calm, not angry. "Then the sign will come today." He turned to his son. "Listen carefully. You will return to the palace first. Let no one know of me. I will follow as the beggar Athena first made me. The suitors will mock. Let them. Patience will win what fury would destroy." Telemachus nodded. "The bow waits upon the wall still," he said softly. "Mother keeps it, saying only the man who can string it shall be her husband." Odysseus looked toward the window where sunlight cut through the smoke. "Then justice has already found its instrument." They left the hut before dusk. The path wound down through olive groves where the light turned golden. Odysseus walked behind Eumaeus, leaning on a staff. His disguise returned. Telemachus went ahead, carrying only the weight of purpose. As they neared the palace, laughter spilled from its open doors, loud, careless, cruel. The smell of roasted meat and spilled wine drifted into the air. Odysseus paused outside, looking up at the familiar stones. His home, the same pillars, the same hearth, and yet changed, like a song sung by strangers. He whispered, "Let me enter not as conqueror, but as memory restored." Then he stepped inside. The hall was crowded with men, young nobles from neighboring isles, loud in their pride. They jeered as he passed. "Look at this beggar," one sneered. "Perhaps he comes to beg for a bride as well." Another laughed. He smells of sea and sleep, fitting company for our queen's patience. Penelope sat apart on her chair of carved wood, her eyes unreadable. She glanced once at the beggar, and something within her stirred. Not recognition, but a pulse of memory. The tilt of his head, the stillness of his gaze. It was like a word she could almost recall, but not yet speak. She rose. "Stranger," she said gently, "you are welcome in this house. The hearth of Odysseus has always been open to those in need." Her voice trembled slightly on his name. Odysseus bowed low. "Lady, your kindness honours a man long unworthy of such grace." She studied him. "There is no unworthiness in survival," she said. Then she turned to the suitors. "You have feasted and competed for years. Let us make an end to this. Tomorrow, whoever can string my husband's great bow and shoot an arrow clean through 12 axes shall have my hand." The suitors laughed, confident. The bow had hung untouched for decades, its wood seasoned, its string unyielding. None but Odysseus had ever bent it. That night, as the hall emptied into drunken sleep, Penelope lingered by the fire. The beggar sat quietly at the edge of the room. "Tell me," she said softly, "do you know of Odysseus? Has the sea swallowed him, or does he still walk beneath the same stars as I?" He looked into the flames. "He walks," he said, "weary but unbroken. And every night he dreams of a woman who still weaves his name into the cloth of the world." Penelope turned away quickly, her breath unsteady. "Then may the gods guide him home, whoever he may be." Morning came bright and sharp. The suitors gathered, laughing as servants set the axes in a row. Telemachus stood beside his mother, outwardly calm. One by one, the suitors tried the bow. Each strained, grunted, cursed, but the string would not yield. The wood remained unmoved, its strength a quiet memory of its master. At last, the beggar stepped forward. "May I try?" he asked. The suitors erupted in laughter. The old man would string a god's weapon. But Penelope, watching him closely, said, "Let him. Sometimes the gods favour the humble." Odysseus took the bow in his hands. The wood felt alive beneath his fingers, warm as flesh. He turned it slowly, testing its grain. Then, with ease born of memory, he bent it and slipped the string into place. The sound it made was low, pure, a note that silenced every voice in the hall. He plucked it once, and the string sang like a swallow in flight. Then he took an arrow, set it to the string, and drew it back. The motion was fluid, effortless, a movement carved into his body by years. He loosed. The arrow flew straight through all 12 axe heads, clean and sure. It struck the final target with a sound like thunder rolling across stone. Silence followed. The suitors stared. Penelope's hand went to her mouth. Telemachus's eyes filled with tears. Odysseus lowered the bow and looked at his son. "The trial is ended." Then he turned to the suitors. His voice was calm, steady, no louder than the sea before a wave breaks. "You have eaten my bread, dishonoured my house, and shamed the name of hospitality. Now the reckoning comes." What followed was not rage but precision. Swift, silent, inevitable. With his son beside him, Odysseus restored order to his home, as dawn restores light to the world. When it was done, he stood in the quiet hall, breathing hard. The bow rested against the wall once more. The air smelled of smoke and salt. Penelope stepped forward slowly, her eyes full of disbelief and wonder. "If you are truly Odysseus," she whispered, "you will know a secret no stranger could." He smiled, weary and certain. "Our bed, lady, built from the trunk of a living olive tree, rooted deep in the ground. No hand could move it without breaking it." Her breath caught. The world seemed to pause. Then she ran to him, and they held each other as if the years had been only a single long night. The lamps flickered. Outside, the dawn broke full and gold across the olive hills. Odysseus closed his eyes and let the light find him. At last, there was no sea between him and home. Morning came slow and golden. The air above Ithaca held that sacred stillness that follows storms and endings alike, the hush between heartbeat and exhale, when even the gods paused to listen. Dew clung to the olive leaves, turning every branch into a jeweled thread. The house of Odysseus, once defiled by arrogance and noise, breathed again like a living heart rediscovering its rhythm. Within the great hall, lamps still flickered, their smoke curling upward through beams of sunlight. The smell of ash and wine mingled with something gentler now, the scent of bread baking, of linen newly washed, of life returning. Odysseus stood in that quiet, barefoot on the cool stone. His bow rested against the wall, its work done. He no longer looked like a warrior, nor a wanderer. He looked like a man who had arrived. Beside him stood Penelope, her hand entwined with his. For a long time they said nothing. Words had carried them this far. Promises, prayers, deceptions, songs. But now silence was enough. The years between them folded away like pages of a book closing gently. "You have changed," she said at last. "So have you," he answered, and both smiled because it was true and because change is what love must survive to remain real. Telemachus entered quietly, carrying water from the spring. He stopped at the sight of them together and lowered his head, half in reverence, half in wonder. "Mother," he said softly. "Father." Odysseus reached out, placing a hand upon his son's shoulder. "You have grown taller than the doorframe, and wiser, perhaps, than I ever was." Telemachus smiled faintly. "I have had your name as my compass all my life. Even when I doubted you lived, I walked toward it." Odysseus looked toward the open door where morning light spilled across the threshold. "Then that name has served us both." They went outside together. The land lay before them, the terraced fields, the distant harbour, the blue glimmer of sea beyond. It was smaller than he remembered, and more beautiful. Time had polished its edges rather than worn them down. A shepherd's call drifted faintly through the valley. Smoke rose from nearby cottages. The world had kept moving, faithful to its own quiet duties. Penelope joined them at the door, her hair catching sunlight like threads of gold. She gazed out and whispered, "I used to watch that horizon every morning. Sometimes I thought it was watching back." Odysseus turned to her, a smile in his eyes. "It was." "I just took a long time to answer. They spent the day setting the house in order. The servants, seeing their master returned, wept openly. Old Eurycleia, who had bathed him as a child, kissed his hands and murmured prayers. Eumaeus, the swineherd, arrived from the fields, tears running freely down his weathered face. "My king," he said, voice thick, "I told them you would return." Odysseus embraced him. "You are the truest of all my captains," he said. Your loyalty built a bridge stronger than any ship. Together they worked, not as ruler and servant, but as family, restoring what time had scattered. The hall was scrubbed, the hearth rekindled. The walls, which had heard so much false laughter, now echoed only quiet voices and the crackle of new fire. Outside, the olive tree by the courtyard stood untouched, its leaves glinting silver and green. Odysseus touched its trunk with his palm. The bark was rough, the roots deep. It was the same tree from which he had built their marriage bed, living still, faithful through the years. He thought of all the trees he had seen on other shores, tall palms, dark cypresses, golden laurels, but none had the humble grace of this one. Ithaca was not a land of grandeur. It was a land of endurance, and endurance, he had learned, was its own form of nobility. That night, the moon rose over the island, silvering the terraces, the rooftops, the calm sea beyond. The world felt smaller again, not because it had diminished, but because he finally fit back inside it. At the hearth, Penelope sat beside him, weaving once more. The soft rhythm of her shuttle was like breathing, steady, patient, infinite. The sound filled the hall with peace. "What do you weave now?" he asked, his voice low. She smiled without looking up. "Something without end, not a shroud, not a trap, not a promise, just a pattern that pleases the eye." He nodded. "That is enough." They fell into companionable silence. The fire threw light across their faces, making the years melt into the present. The sea outside whispered against the cliffs, no longer calling, only speaking in friendship. After a while, Penelope said, "Do you ever think the gods tire of watching us struggle so much to find our way home?" Odysseus considered. Perhaps they do, but perhaps they also envy us, that we can lose and still love again, fail and still hope again. The gods have eternity, we have the moment, and that is enough to make them jealous. She laughed softly, the sound like water in a basin. "You still speak in riddles, my love." He smiled. "It is my one unchanging flaw." Later, when she went to rest, Odysseus walked alone through the courtyard. The air was cool. He looked up at the stars, bright, clear, unchanged since Troy. He traced the constellations with his eyes, the bear, the hunter, the great curved line of the ship Argo. For the first time in many years, he felt no longing to follow them anywhere. Behind him came a faint rustle. Athena stood once more in the shadow of the olive tree, her armour faintly luminous. "You have done all that was asked of you," she said. "The song of your wandering is complete." Odysseus bowed his head. "And yet the sea will call again." She smiled. "Let it. The call itself is the proof of life." He looked at her, at the calm wisdom in her gaze, at the patient kindness beneath her strength. "Will the world remember me?" he asked. Athena tilted her head. "It will remember the part of you that belongs to it, the restless heart, the unbroken will. The rest will live here, where memory does not need words." She gestured toward the house, toward Penelope's loom, and the laughter of Telemachus echoing faintly from the upper rooms. Then she was gone, dissolving into the night like breath upon glass. When dawn returned, it came with a grace so pure it seemed the sky itself was giving thanks. The light spread slowly across the sea, turning each ripple into gold. Fishermen set out from the harbour, calling to one another. A shepherd's flute drifted from the hills. Ithaca was awake again, not in glory, but in quiet purpose. Odysseus stepped outside as the first sunlight touched his face. The warmth was soft, familiar. The journey, he realized, had not been toward this island alone, but toward this very moment. Standing still, breathing freely, without the weight of fear or pride. Penelope joined him, her hand finding his. Together, they watched the light climb higher, painting the olive leaves with fire. The island shimmered like a living promise, fragile, eternal, perfectly enough. Telemachus came out soon after, stretching, laughing softly at some small thing only youth understands. Odysseus turned toward him and felt the circle of years close gently, not with finality, but with completion. He thought of Troy, of the Cyclops, of Circe and Calypso, of winds bound and unbound, of death itself faced and passed through. All of it, he saw now, had been leading here, to this dawn, to this quiet, to this simple fullness. "Father," said Telemachus, squinting into the sun, "what will you do now?" Odysseus smiled. "What all men must do. Live, listen, and when the sea calls, answer, but only with peace." They walked down toward the shore together. The tide lapped gently at their feet, neither claiming nor rejecting them. The gulls wheeled overhead, bright against the new blue sky. Odysseus closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The salt, the wind, the scent of olive and earth, all of it was home. He whispered to the sea, "We are even, you and I." The waves whispered back, "Yes." And so the long wandering ended, not with fanfare or thunder, but with a man standing in sunlight, his hand in his wife's, his heart finally still. The gods watched from their distant heights, and even they were silent. For the story of Odysseus was not of conquest or cunning, but of return, of finding after every storm that what endures is love, and what saves us is the will to keep going. The day brightened. The island shimmered. The air carried the scent of home. And somewhere in the stillness between wind and wave, a voice, perhaps his own, perhaps the world's, whispered the last line of his long song. The journey ends, but the sea remains, quiet, endless, alive.